Good morning and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have a boardroom talk with myself, Mighty Pete, and Heather Lundy is back in the driving seat. So good morning, Heather.
Good morning, Pete. Wanted to get talking to you today about the power of being listened to.
Yes.
So I want you to talk to us about the power of being listened to and connection.
Well, that's kind of what it's all about. In a very simple way, I suppose. If you take, being listened to is, and you hear people saying in terms of, do you hear me? Am I, don't know what's going on. If you don't have a connection is vital in terms of transfer of energy, transfer of information, transfer of, cells in our body. So this transfer happens, no one thing, something can be on its own, but basically it will not survive long term because it needs input of food, it needs output of, excess product, or it needs to, to be able to feel love and connection. So that's why, being listened to, and the more you listen to someone, the more you resonate on their frequency, then actually the stronger that connection comes. And I mean, as we sort of talked about in terms of Jordan Peterson talks a lot about it, and, different nodes and connections. And if you think of almost like a big spider diagram, we are, and you put yourself in the center, and then, I mean, Facebook, you might know 5,000 people or 5 people, whatever it is. Well, actually, you then know, and the quality of that connection with those people and how much you do or don't know about them. So if you have somebody that you know really well and you've listened to them, so you know their story, you know their passions, their beliefs, and that's a healthy friendship, as in you're supporting each other, loving each other, giving each other space, gratitude, and sort of, really sort of promoting each other. That's a very strong connection. It's a very positive. It's kind of, where it's a connection that will actually give off energy. So when you come together, as people do, they come together and actually there's an energy, and you see it and people going, God, I love to see you, and it's great to see you and all the rest, because that connection, that bond is being sort of reformed again, or it's being strengthened, so, and you see the language, you see it in their face, and they're going, oh, it's lovely to see you. So there is that resonance.
And what about that feeling? Because you're getting across kind of what it looks like. What about that feeling? How would that feel for you?
It's, people will talk about it being, it's a bit like, I just feel at home. Or, the expression is, I feel like I know you. I've known you for years. It's that knowing. It's suddenly, it's almost disconcerting because so, you actually resonate on the same thing. So your values are very similar, for you, sort of simple language, in terms of, you might like certain things together. Now, it might be competitive sports, but it might be a different sport, but that's okay. Or you might like to do certain activities and both be sort of risk takers, or you might both be sort of savers, or you might be spenders. So you actually resonate. So like, people quite often are actually attracted to people that look like them, or, are similar to them, simply because, their value sets, and you're kind of going, I could get on with you really well, because frankly, I get on with myself and you're not that dissimilar to me. Therefore I can get on with you. And it's kind of going, God, it's kind of like we've known each other forever, isn't it? Isn't it weird? And it's like, well, yeah, because, you are talking similar language, you've similar beliefs, you've similar wants, you've potentially similar backgrounds. I'm not saying all matching, but there's enough there to almost be an uncanny connection. And then when somebody is sort of able to, when you're looking at somebody and you see that reflected back to you, you recognize it, and therefore it almost feels like you're being listened to, because they reacted that way. That's probably similar to the way I would have reacted. So I'm almost listening to what they're doing, and that resonates again, so we like to be around like-minded people, for the very reason is we like what they're doing, which means we like what we're doing, which means we all feel good. The connection is strengthened. The actual, it's an energy positive exchange connection, as in it gives off energy. It's the opposite of basically a mood hoover. We meet somebody and go, geez, I feel drained. This person has just taken away and sucked a bit of my life force out of me. That's a negative connection. That's somebody, and that's energy is going one way. Or vice versa. You can meet someone that is, I think that's sometimes why we're quite often, we get a bit starstruck with somebody who's done better than us as we perceive, or they're more successful. And that's quite often because they're radiating a sort of potentially a bigger energy, or we perceive to be, it's an unfair exchange of energy. you know, they're at a higher place, they're at a different place. So suddenly we don't feel like we're on a level playing field with them. Therefore, we are subservient, you know, and we sort of, you know, we bow down and lovely to meet you. And, you know, we actually sort of belittle ourselves to sort of mentally almost position ourselves underneath them because we see them as more qualified, more connected, more whatever.
And they're the very people we're usually going to be listening to, I suppose. Not, you know, not necessarily feeling inferior, but certainly, yeah, that looking up to and wanting to listen to them.
Yeah, I think you're, you know, it's listening to as opposed to, you know, actually, you know, you're hearing what they're saying. So you're not, you know, it's not a two-way conversation. They're saying you're in full receive mode, but you're in receive mode, and they're telling you what they, you know, they want you to hear too. So they're not sitting there and sharing and going, "What do you think, Heather?"
Yeah.
You know, this is a kind of going, "This is my success story. You know, I'm going to say things that's going to resonate to as many people as possible here. So I'm going to use all my different languages." And I'm going to look at the audience and form a connection, all that. But this is a one-way street, be under no illusions. But they want to resonate with you so that you feel it's kind of going, I got them. You know, I really got them. And I feel like he was talking to me or she was talking to me. You know, so you kind of go, I feel this connection with this person, even though I'm in a room of X 10,000, 100, whatever people.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the power of somebody who's able to go, God, they just connect, and I felt their energy and all this. And that's right. I mean, that on a sort of another level, that is correct. But you know, it's why people, but they can never sort of say, right, we'll go up and have a chat with them. And they go, oh,
Yeah.
gee, really? You know, and can I get your autograph? And can I get you, you know, can I get a photo with you and all this? You know, so
Yeah.
we're actually sort of climbing up the ladder, going, God, I'd love to listen to you. You know, I could listen to you all day. You know, even the language you use in terms of saying, you know, isn't that funny that you would listen all day to resonate with them, to hear yourself, you know? And again, we sort of, we're,
Yes, exactly. Because that's what you're doing. Yeah, you're
yeah,
listening to them to really find yourself or
yeah.
that part of you that wants to be where they're at.
And that is a skill in terms of public speaking, is kind of going, be under no illusions that actually public speaking is about the person, you know. And I've had it in the past, and people said, can you come and give us a 20-minute talk about your journey? You know, and it was Pat Slattery that sort of said to me, he says, you do realize this is not about you, don't you? And I was like, kind of, you know,
Really?
they've asked my story, and it's like going, yeah, fair enough. The first slide or the first two slides or the first 2 minutes can be who I am, what I am. But after that, people are going, what's in this for me?
Yeah.
You know, mentally they kind of go, oh, that's a lovely story and all that. But if they can't resonate and they kind of go, I don't know, I don't get it at all, you know, or the background or whatever, whereas you kind of go, I was in a place of pain. You know, this is where I was, and people going, I've had pain, okay. And you kind of go, and I was driving a red car, and people going, okay, I can think of a red car. You know, I haven't said what, you know, so it's almost purposely vague in terms of the language coming at you, so
Yeah.
that you're allowed to, you know, you're sitting there with your art and your pencil, and you can start drawing your picture, which you recognize because it's your picture.
Yeah.
You know, it's their guidance, your picture. You know, and suddenly you kind of go, I really get this guy because I see this picture, but everyone in the audience has painted their picture, you know, and then you kind of go, the guy that sort of told me how to paint this picture is just there, and my picture and him and me and her, and we're all, this is happening, we're there, we're all being listened to, we're connecting, and it's beautiful, you know. And there is a lot of energy given off, but you know, is that a genuine connection, or is, you know, it can be positive, can be negative, you know. It's like we can be inspired by somebody we may never ever meet, but that's still a positive connection, and that's okay. But they've also chosen to set themselves at a position of, you know, giving off energy, giving out the right vibes, their connections, their closest five people, their, you know, how they sort of present themselves, you know, the message that they send out to the world, you know, in terms of, I'm positive in what I do, and, you know, just giving no space or boundaries. So their ethos is all about, you know, being good, being connecting with people. And you know, and you think about all the sort of really sort of big people you think about in you know, as we would perceive as successful, you kind of going, I feel like they just got me, you know, like I connected with them, or they heard me or whatever. And you know, we're desperate to get that. And you kind of go, statistically, or you know, they couldn't have the time in the day to do it. Do you know what I mean?
They're
Between
meeting
every,
tens of thousands of people. Yeah.
but yet in a split second, you know, they can, that one connection's enough, you know. And as we've talked about before, listen, you know, like in an accident, it doesn't take a lifetime for a connection. It can be in the blink of an eye. You
Yeah,
know,
it
it can
could
just
be
be a
instant.
moment. It can be something. It could be, politicians are actually generally quite good at it. You know, and actually one person that's, you know, of body language and people are saying is actually Bill Clinton. He was seen as very much someone who, you know, he could be meeting a sort of another president, or he could be meeting someone on the street and had this ability to get a connection. You know, and then people go, I connected, therefore I kind of feel like they got me and they listened to me. You know, listening is not always via the sort of the two lumps on the side of your head. It's
Yeah,
listening in terms of the feel, you know, how do you feel about that and the gut and everything else. It's the most powerful form. So, and that's why, you know, connecting and listening are all sort of intricately linked, you know, and excuse me. And so there's, you know, that's why, you know, people would always say, you know, if you're depressed, you isolate, you know, as in you're holding back your feelings, you isolate. And that, it can be one of the cruelest things you can do to someone, to isolate them, you know. And it's, and we were talking before, it's about, it can be almost a form of punishment for a child. Go to your room, go separate, you know, or I'm going to isolate you from the crowd, you know.
yeah,
And again, as we were saying before this, and like COVID has been painful, that because people have been forced into isolation.
mm,
And forced isolation and voluntary isolation are very different. You know, some people saying I love to be on my own, but that can also be premeditated with, as long as I can come back and join the crowd when I'm ready, you
yeah,
know. But if you're sort of going, no, no, you're going out on your own and you need to stay out there until I tell you otherwise. Well, the tone and context of that is completely different. It's not voluntary, you know, it's outside of your will. It's, you know, it's all that. So suddenly isolation feels bad, you know, and go to your room, or, you know, they talk about isolation chambers in jails and things like that, and psychiatry wards and all these things, you know. It's like isolation is seen as safe, as in we need to ring fence this, but also it's possibly, you know, one of the most hurtful things you can do to someone is to isolate them and going, you know, it's a playground thing. You're not my friend. You
yeah.
know,
Oh,
I'm not listening to you. You know, I'm not connected. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of going,
oh, so, yeah, you can feel it, like that kind of playground stuff, you know.
it
Yeah,
is, you know, and fundamentally it's built into us, you know. It's like, I want to connect to you, you know. Kids cry so they get connection. Kids, you know, that's what they want to do. They want to be connected and they want to be there, and they feel that way they feel warmth. You know, can they hear you? They can't know or understand the words per se, but they can feel the connection. They can, you know, they can, you know, hear your sort of positive vibes, your warmth, your love, your, you know, your care for them. And that's what they sort of, you know, you're listening to them, you're listening to their needs. You know,
yeah,
I want to be fed, I want to be sleep, I want my nappy changed, I want whatever, you know. And ultimately then you become my carer, my giver. You know, I associate you with warmth and strength and comfort and value, you know. And that's the parent child bond too. So it's listening all around, you know. And it's just, I suppose, sense checking um, the healthiness of the listening, you know. And listen, we're at all different times, you know. There's times when we need to listen more than, you know, and we need to be heard for various
yeah,
reasons, positively and negatively. There's other times we need to be the listener, you know. And it can be harder to, I almost feel like it's like a dam, you know. Eventually it gets to the point of overflow. It's like if you don't have an opportunity to vent, you know. People talk about blowing off, you know, and I need to blow off steam, you know. It's
yeah,
that little saying, because there's a pent up, you know, sort of amount of energy or things they want to say until they sort of have this, you know. It's like, I'm sorry, I just had a bit of verbal diarrhea there. It's like, well, no, it's stuff they wanted to say, I wanted to get out, but it's been festering until it sort of eventually builds up. So, you know, almost if you can accept that there's a time you need to listen, there's a time you need to be the listener, you know, and sort of have a healthy ability to get that out on a regular basis, then, you know, the quality of that, then you get more balance in terms of, yes, that's fine. I'm happy to be the listening cap on today. And, you know, a good friend will do that, you know, when you get a great connection and kind of going, listen, enough about me. Tell me about you. Tell me what's going on and what's happening here. And that's permission. You kind of going, you know, as a listener, you kind of going, they got me, and thank you for listening, and thank you for taking the time out for me and all the rest. So you can see how that connection is so strong for us, and we need that as humans, because otherwise, you know, disconnection and it can be treated as a weapon in so many ways, or it can be treated as a, you know, as a consequence or a punishment, you know. And not done in the right way. It's, you know, if we lack something, and we talked about, you know, the universe abhors a vacuum,
vacuum.
and that's why. So we're saying, well, if we get that, then we'll start thinking negative thoughts. Or someone saying, well, I'm leaving you. Okay, that's cutting a connection. And suddenly you kind of go, well, but what am I going to do? Because they've suddenly created this vacuum in your life, which unfortunately then sneaks in doubt. It sneaks in anxiety. Your mind goes into overdrive because it's kind of going, I've got 6 billion what ifs to work out here, so I'm going to just be a bit anxious right now, in terms of working out, because my value set's been pulled, my connection that I thought this was a really strong connection, and suddenly it's been severed, and it's sort of cut off. So suddenly there, it's that's why we sort of feel that quite badly. So again, the power of being listened to in terms of, what is it you need? And it's on a deep level. I mean, it's not just a case of going, I need a loaf of bread, yeah, okay, that is a very basic need, but it's also kind of going, I need you to hear me, or I need you to sort of listen to what I'm saying, and different relations. Sometimes you actually have to spell it out, and sometimes it just can be someone going, I just love sitting down with my mummy or my daddy or whoever it is, or someone that they just get me. Okay, so that's a beautiful, free-flowing relationship. There's little or no judgment there, and they love you no matter what. That it's there. So that's a very warm and glowing connection. And it's the old saying, blood is thicker than water, in terms of, well, they're always going to be connected to me. They have no choice about that, but I can choose if it's going to be positive or negative. And when people sort of resonate back to a family, a home, a point of connection, that they recognize and they bring all these memories back to, and it's just reinforcing those connections, it's super positive. So again, that's where I feel like I'm most like myself. Or, people say I meet up with old friends, and funnily enough, I become like how I used to be as well, because you're connecting and they're listening to you in that way, which can be positive and can be negative. Meeting old friends can bring up old wounds, or it can be that's old patterns or things, that's the way I used to be, which can serve you to a point. But vice versa, it might be that actually they haven't heard who you are now. How many people go is like, yeah, my friends have no idea what I do. Is that a healthy connection? Well, it's healthy. It's serving you in many ways in terms of love and connection and support, and that overall ethos and the way you live your life. But are they actually be able to support you in what you do day to day? Well, you don't know, because they have no idea what you do, or how you do it, and your new goals and your new dreams. And people sort of go, if they only knew what I was planning or what I did outside of this relationship, they would sort of think I was a bit weird or daft or whatever. So I'm happy enough to hold this relationship at this level. This other relationship of this other tribe I have, that I can sort of, this connection, I can sit at this level, and then someone else. So hence why we have almost different friends for different reasons and different benefits and different connections. And again, some people will listen and be very good listeners, but that could be a very formulated arrangement, hence why we have counselors, mentors, coaches, all those sort of people as well. So that's formalized and kind of going, I'm paying you to listen.
Exactly. Yeah, we quite often do pay people to really listen.
Yeah, and that's, and again, we sort of saying it's because they don't hear me, or you can't, you're not listening to me.
See, whenever you were talking there about how to check, well, you didn't say, you were saying about, you can check that you're being listened to. And I was, whenever you were saying it, I was thinking, how do you do that? How do you do that? How would you do that?
I think sort of unintentionally, I'm very aware of a number of things. So it's you talk maybe about intuition. If somebody has heard you, quite often they will either respond. So you will see response signals, as in, so if you're trying to get a message across, and generally you're passing on information. So you will see a recognition, as in, are you, your message and their, is that connection, am I transferring it in the right way? Are they picking up? So if you need someone to recognize, you kind of go, oh, okay, eyebrows up, and, and you get you actually get a nod, or you get, oh, okay, that's okay. Or, it's kind of going, yeah, okay. You can tell straight facially, you can tell by the tone, and that connection. So we're subconsciously picking this up all the time, and it's like, and then when it gets really bad, you kind of go, do you know what I mean? Do you understand? Okay. Do you know what I mean? And we really do sort of question it. I mean, that's almost like the sort of the very last chance of kind of going, oh, geez, I don't know if they got me at all. So we just intuitively sense check all the time in terms of, are they listening? Have they got me? What is the connection here? Am I on the right page? But some people you go, and it happens with siblings where someone can go, it can be a look. I know with I'm very close to my sister, and a look is enough. Other people are sort of going, what are you guys laughing about? And we both know that we're maybe talking about some, or the look was like something had happened and going, that was from 20 years ago. And she's like, yeah. And that's enough. The connection is there because you've got history, you've got value in each other, you've got, there's so much there. And, and that's a beautiful connection. I mean, it has its, it can also be very raw when someone knows you that deeply. It's sometimes if you're not potentially ready to share or whatever, then it's quite often, people that you love, you actually isolate yourself from, because it's like, I just don't know if I'm ready to share yet, or I'm ready to be around them, because they actually make you feel vulnerable, so it's understanding that too. It's, it could be that if we've not listened to ourselves, and we're sort of, it's the washing machine and kind of a what if, but I didn't do this, but then he did that, and and we've all this, like, we're trying to process
The
it.
dialogue.
Yeah, it is the dialogue. We're chatting away to ourselves. And like I say, I kind of sort of say, that's the voices in your head that you hear, right? And it's like, well, it sounds a bit crazy. So it's like, you're inner critic, yeah. Oh yeah, I've got an inner critic. Okay, so by the time you process this and you've gone through all this, someone you're really connected to, you might say, oh God, I've not spoken to them in ages. And when you're starting to see patterns, and that this almost the silt it's all starting to settle down a bit. Well, then you feel strong enough to go and have a connection, and actually then sort of share. And ultimately then you might overshare, you might go through there, but you feel strong enough that you've processed that enough, and then if it's a connection you're maybe not ready for, or it's difficult, then it gets emotional, as in, it's, you get out of control, as in tears, as in, just uncontrolled emotions, and you hear people say, I can't do this right now. Okay, that's the most basic form of shouting and saying, I'm not sure where I'm at, my values are all over the place, I can't listen to myself, you're trying to tell me something and it's not aligning and nothing's making sense here. I need to isolate, I need to get away, so I'll run away, run away from a problem, run away from an isolation, run away from do this, which can be healthy or, positive or negative too. So there's different reasons for different times at different places,
Who has listened to you? What's been the power of being listened to for you?
That's a very good question, actually. Who has listened to me? I think a number of people have listened to me, and I don't necessarily, haven't necessarily appreciated the connection at the time. But sometimes when something feels so familiar, it's like, I actually don't know if it's real or not, or that was in my head. Do you know when you get sometimes with people and you kind of going, was that in my head, or do we talk about it? I really don't know.
Yeah.
It's,
No, I totally do get that. Yeah.
and it is that sort of crazy connection. And, when people listen to you, sometimes it's probably the telltale is when you just feel great around someone, or you love meeting up with them. That's generally somebody that has listened to you in some ways, or you've had an equal share or an agreeable share of information and connection and listening to each other. So it could be a good friend and going, I love, people say, I love meeting up with old friends, and that's the thing, because, it's one, it's a healthy distance too. They're old friends, and the usual thing is we should meet up more often, and it's let's stay in touch and all these things. So the values and the intents are great. Now it might be that you're just operating on a different level, but for the purpose of that connection, that's not in your life every day, but actually it's a healthy point, and it's a good point, and that's where you listen to. So I think listening, and connections you have are on multiple different levels. And some of those relationships will stay at that level unless you consciously take them to another level. It's like patterns that our parents have, it's like, well, I'm not telling them that because I know how he will react or she will react. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, well, that's not a conversation for them. That's from my new tribe that I brought in here because they think like that. So let's go and we'll talk about that with these people. And that's kind of the way I'm going to tell it to my my parents. I keep picking on parents, could be anyone, for as a matter of fact, but so we have different stories or different tones or context or the way we do it for different people. Whereas quite often then when whether it be a partner or someone else like that, they're considered, the expression is, you can see me and you love me warts and all, as in you listen to me and you see me at my worst, you see me at my best. And that's a beautiful connection, because it's very forgiving, it's very loving, it's warm, it's generous, even though you're at your best and you're at your worst. So it's that that's kind of, I suppose, people I listen to, and I suppose one person that would spring straight to mind is probably my mother, and that's just a maternal connection too, mothers and sons maybe, and but there's different connections. And then also my sister, we would have slightly different values and things like that, but at the same time we listen to each other on another level. We're actually too similar in a way, and that's what we were saying earlier, whereby we resonate at a very, not the same, but a very similar frequency, but we're also applying different experiences, which can be a bit like that, the Doppler effect or the bridge effect, is saying, well, the problem is the two energies come together, and it's kind of like the blind leading the blind, it's kind of going, actually, we're resonating with each other, and it's not working out. It's the energies are coming head to head, they're not meshing and synchronizing. So that's why you sometimes need somebody to be on a slightly different pace to break the thought cycle, or break the the sort of the process that you're on. So, but like I say, if I want someone to know that they've always got my back, I know I could phone 24 hours a day, no questions, done. I know that's the frequency we're on, and vice versa. But like I say, do we work together every day? No. And it's a bit like, I suppose, why partners can't necessarily work together, and sort of, husband and wife working teams, and it sort of, it resonates on that. And I can listen to you in terms of, your personal life and your goals and your personal things, but the way you operate in your day-to-day and your working environments, yeah, no, because we're now sort of more in a competitive and in more of a winning environment, where there needs to be, that can be win-win, but quite often you're trying to grow the business, and then you have different values and aspirations you're looking forward. So you're not trying to connect to each other, you're both looking forward, which again, the two energies can sort of match off and become unintentionally very energetic, i.e. to the point of being destructive. A bridge eventually picks up frequency enough that it actually destroys itself. Gains so much energy that it changes form, which in this case is destruction. In something else, it could be, we talked about before, it's the Coca-Cola and the Mentos. The two come together. It's a beautiful reaction. There's a huge amount of energy given off, and it's great. And they really sort of, set off each other's energy. But the problem is, you now have two products that you can't use, and it's in some areas that might be a very useful byproduct of what's created of the reaction of those two coming together. But for being a can of Coke or a bottle of Coke and Mentos, they're now neither. Neither is a great energy, and neither are what they were supposed to be or what they could be. So it's just massively changed. So.
I suppose then it is remarkable, like whenever you do watch husband wife teams, like there's some amazing ones as well. It's fantastic the way people can work. I'm really interested though, because I've been watching you on very much on a journey over the past 15 months, I suppose. You would have been on my radar in terms of the work that you were doing, and the things that you were doing, and the podcast and putting things out in the world. And I'm really interested to know who listened to you, how were you changing and evolving, and who was it that was kind of listening to you, and how did you do that?
My initial reaction there is I listened. The person I was listening to was actually myself. So it talks about the concept as being, there's your true self, and if you, I suppose, to try and keep the language as sort of normal as possible. So your true self being, who you are, and that's why in a lot of the interviews I ask people, talk to us about, mini you, your junior version of you. Now, typically, a lot of people say that's up to 7 years of age. You are the sort of the purest form of yourself, or up to 3 years of age. That's just who you are. and you sort of, joy is joy, and happiness is happiness, and sadness is sadness. It's very binary. You don't, kids, and same with animals. There's not many dogs hold a grudge, apart from when you're going to the vets, but typically a dog doesn't go, you didn't pet me twice yesterday. It's very different. Kids are very like that. You upset me. You're not my friend. I love you. And it's almost it's almost bipolar, the kids, and I have it with my own 4-year-old at the moment now. She's, it's, I love you, daddy, you're my best friend. You're not my friend anymore, and it's like,
yeah,
okay.
You didn't give me a biscuit. I hate you. Yeah. And then they'll be back in 10 minutes. Yeah.
And it's beautiful for that, the simplicity of the connection is gorgeous, in terms of going, okay, it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster, but okay, we know where we stand, and there's no sort of premeditation there. As in, well, do you know what, you weren't nice to me 3 weeks ago, and I don't feel that you're serving me. Kids are just much more binary. So ultimately, and I think that's what happened to me in terms of, there started to be a split in terms of who I am, who I truly am as me as a person, as a human being, and my sort of wants, values, needs, but then who I became. So, who are you today versus who you truly are, and loads of different people talk about it, but that's the reason you will start doing that. So you'll hear things like, well, I'm a pleaser. Okay, a pleaser means that you're actually trying to gain connection from somebody else. So you change slightly what you do so that somebody else likes you more. So it's kind of like playground stuff, and kind of going, well, if I do this, or he likes the way I put my hair like that, or if I play with them, they'll like me more. Okay. And it might be, well, what do you want to do? It's like, well, I don't really like playing. Okay, but if you play with them, they like you. So, okay, well, I'll change me a little bit so that they connect, and I get that connection. So I get the warmth of that, but I've actually sort of slightly sacrificed, or I've bent my own values, wants, and beliefs. Well, this just amplifies all the way through life to eventually going, well, okay, why did you do what did you do in school? Well, I did this. Why? Because mommy did this, or daddy did this, or I've heard that doctors are a great job, or, someone said to me, if I don't do this, then, you're not successful, and all these 50 different people's opinions. And then I look at the Kardashians on TV, and that's success, or I look at something else, or I look at Instagram, and the addiction of the likes on Facebook and all this. So, but then you sort of go, what do you want? What I mean, it just comes back to that whole thing. And again, the silence shocks us too, because you're kind of going, okay, I've not been in this place for a while, so I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable right now, and it's like, well, what do you want? It's like, what I want doesn't matter. So moving forward in between all that, and I think through time that, people then, again, the common occurrence that I'm starting to see is in terms of people getting to their midlife opportunity. So that's when they get far enough along in their life, and they've pulled all the baggage of, if I play with them, they'll make them happier. If I do this, they'll be happy. If I do this, then my kids will love me. And if I do this will do. So all these 50 things, and it's kind of like it's like an Excel sheet with 1,000 formulas on it, and kind of going, well, I want to go from A to B, but to do that, I have to go through this whole thing. And then, funnily enough, at the point where you're actually most unlike yourself, for me, was a point of midlife crisis, which I've reframed to say it's a midlife opportunity. And that's the point when you kind of go, I'm lost. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's the meaning of life, everything else, because you're so far off the mark in your own values, your wants, your beliefs, your needs, and all this, and going. And then, funnily enough, we decide to isolate. We either go through depression, or something that actually allows us to start cutting off and kind of going, I've got to leave you. I've got to, I'm going in depression. I've got to do something. So that's almost the body going, listen, we got to close these doors, because there's so much noise of what everyone wants, what you want, what he wants, and all this. I don't know what I want anymore. Well, funnily enough, you're at the point almost of maximum gap. They talk about that, close the gap. Well, that gap is the further you are away, then, people go, well, what do you want? Well, I don't know. What do you want? Okay. Well, straight away, that's disassociation. You said, well, I don't really know what I want, or I'm afraid to say, but I know if I make you happy, then that's good enough for me, because I get a bit of love and connection, and that's the point. And you kind of going, anyone that doesn't know what they want, you kind of going, again, it's trying to massage that, octopus. It's like, it's just a very unsatisfying, the jellyfish. How do you massage a jellyfish? I don't know. You just keep squeezing it, and I don't know. Does it feel good? I don't know. There's no structure. There's nothing there.
And your energy there, whenever you were talking about that, it is that of like I suppose when you get to that midlife opportunity and you're looking at yourself, you want that for everyone. I think, I don't know about you, but a lot of times people want that for everyone. You don't want, you don't want or don't like seeing people who are trying to fit something that they think I will like, or do you know what I mean? It makes me very uncomfortable. I don't want anybody to have to change to fit or to meet what they think my expectations are. There's a it affects me in a negative way, even though they're maybe trying to do it. They think they're doing it for me, maybe, but
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable with it.
Well, I mean, the key thing is you don't feel it's
Oh, yeah, me, yeah.
this is you, and I suppose, I mean, what sort of just came into my head there in terms of, it's a bit like the beauty of a bank card, and we all have 4-digit codes. Okay, there's 56 odd million people in the UK, and yet 4 digits is enough to distinguish us all. Now some of us may have similar codes, and but the point, I suppose, of that is kind of going, we can all work by very simple principles. We all work to the same system in terms of you bang in your code if you want to buy something, your 4 digits, 4 digits, 4 digits. But actually, some people will, you'll connect to people, that will be the code to connect to these people. Someone else, it'll be a different code for a different card and a different reason or whatever, and a different password into your emails. So that's the connection to that piece and that. So when you try and change a code, you try and change that connection, unfortunately, they don't necessarily feel the way you feel. They maybe haven't seen what you've seen. You've seen the highs, the consequences. You felt that loss, you felt that gain, you felt all these passions. So you trying to change them, it's kind of going, well, listen, if you just do this, you'll feel better. It's like, well, that's based on your version of feeling better. Because for them, that could be going, I would feel worse if that happened to me. So changing levels and trying to sort of jump in the different things, like trying to change your pin code and then going, why the hell is this not working? It's like, yeah, because you're talking in a different language. It's a different code. It's a different connection. And, so when people, trying to bring everyone with you, it's great and you mean well and all the rest, but actually possibly the best way you can serve them is listening to them, giving them that space, trying to do it without judgment or reality and saying, well, how many times have we sat there and going, well, Jesus, if you just did this, your problems would be solved. Okay. In your opinion, and again, I come back to going, you change 4 things, you change 4 things on your PIN code. You're not getting the money. You're not getting the connection, and you change any one of those digits and then suddenly, everything changes, all the combinations, the variations, everything else changes. It could be a book, it could be a split-second connection with somebody, it could be something you heard on the radio, it could be a feeling or a screeching noise of a car. So, do you know what I mean? And that can change our belief systems in a second. So do you think then, if we are taking on, as we talked before, about 11 million bits of information per second, if 1% of that was different, which is highly likely, in fact, it's probably almost definitely, is it any reason why they come out with a slightly different combination? And therefore their connection is slightly different and their beliefs are different. So it is Jay Shetty's, we said a couple of interviews ago, in terms of saying it's the Jay Shetty's like trying to teach a fish to climb a tree. Well, a fish is a fish and a tree is a tree. And yes, people will climb trees and yes, fish will be fish. But unfortunately, we've just got the wrong combination there. You change the aspect or the expectation, all the rest, and suddenly it's going to go, yeah, it feels great. How many people from school going, I had this great teacher and we really connected and they inspired me and they did all this. You might be an average B grade student in that, but you connected, you felt good, they made you feel good. Suddenly you felt resonance, you felt rapport, you felt all this, and suddenly you excelled in that subject, and it's like, was that because you're actually good at it? Or, it's nature nurture, are you good at it? Or is it because you've been nurtured to be good at it? And I do kind of believe ultimately, through fire in the belly, I think ultimately the sort of things come home to rest. You know, eventually you kind of carrying that baggage around and going. There was a very interesting article or a sort of an experiment, and I'm going to butcher this, but there was basically a father who was doing a kind of a psychological experiment, and he had three daughters, and he wanted to choose something that basically nurture was more powerful. And his three daughters, he taught them chess. He didn't play chess. He learned to play chess. He taught them to play chess. The three of them are world champion, that high standard of chess as they've grown up. You know, and he's saying that wasn't, in his eyes, wasn't nature. You know, they weren't born with it. He wasn't a chess player. They weren't chess players. There was no chess players there. His point was you could train to do that, which I could fully understand. I mean, you follow the 10,000 hour rule, where basically you do something for 10,000 hours and ultimately you will become an expert. You know, that's like a university degree or more, you know, so you do something often enough, you're going to be good at it. You are, you know, there's no doubt about it. You know, if you do it with openness and passion and everything else. Not even passion, just openness. If you keep doing it, you know, through repetition, you will become better at it. You'll become quicker, you'll faster, you'll do it with your eyes shut, all the rest. But going on for that, my kind of point is those three chess players, you know, something they've been nurtured to do, as we all have. You've been nurtured to be a nice girl. You've been nurtured to be, you know, a nice boy, or you've been nurtured to be a pilot because your daddy was, or your mummy was, or that's a very respectable career, or, you know, you've nurtured to love money because you've had a lack of it. So all these 50 billion different variants. But ultimately, I kind of get to the point of that, potentially that midlife opportunity where you're saying, does that actually do it for me? Just because I'm good at it doesn't mean that it's something I love. You know, do I naturally aspire? Do I want to keep doing it? Do I love it? You know, and if money and time were no object, would I be doing that? And I kind of come back to the bucket list in many ways. But, you know, you're saying if I wasn't doing this, would I be doing it in the morning? Well, hell no. Okay, well, that's very telling for a start. You know, but then you kind of go, the bucket list is a beautiful way of starting to bring your dreams, and you take off the negative context. You know, people think bucket list, they think of negative energy, they think of death. Okay, well, bucket list is kind of, put it like, you know, as your 10-year, 20-year, just far enough out that actually it's far enough away that sort of it's not going to bring any tension or stress in terms of the ego coming back in and trying to say, you can't do this, you can't do that. So the bucket list is just held off in a nice sort of, you know, if all things went well, here we go. And the things that people put on that bucket list is so telling, you know, because suddenly they're going, well, I'd love to work with kids. Okay, well, straight away, you've got the love language. So we're saying, I'd love, okay. You know, and that's saying if they had no restrictions, then that's what they would be doing. You know, and they connected to that. Or, you know, I'd love to be doing this, or, you know, and also as we talked before, it's about breaking that down. Why would you be doing, you know, paddleboarding in Donegal? You know, it's because it's all those 50 connections that go on there. You know, so that's, I've actually lost the original question, but it's, you know, those connections all the way through, you know, who you actually are. I do believe all sort of everything comes home to rest eventually. And when you sort of potentially move out of the energy of youth, where you can just do it because, you know, I'll just work a bit harder, or I'll, you know, that's fine, I can just do it. You've got the energy to do that. Well, there's almost a tipping point in life when the polarity changes. You move potentially from pain to pleasure. Hopefully you do, in terms of going, right, well, God, I can't do what I used to do. I can't get up as early. I can't work as hard. I can't, you know, maintain 3 jobs, or do this, or run after the kids, or all the rest. I need to get smart. I need to, you know, find what I want to do. And, you know, I really don't want to do that anymore. That just doesn't do it for me. Do you know what I mean? So suddenly at that age of midlife opportunity, you sort of go, right, time to start stripping off, time to start closing the gap. What do I want? You know, I've got a bit of money, I've got a bit of time, kids, whatever, life, you know, and suddenly going, I feel good, I feel empowered, and suddenly going, what's going to do it for me? You know, go out and buy your vintage car, have your midlife crisis, go on a ridiculous holiday, whatever it is, but get it out of your system. Absolutely, because it's what's underneath that suddenly is kind of going, well, why did you want the car, or why did you want to do this crazy stuff? You know, but that's giving ourselves permission. I have the car. Actually, it wasn't the car that I wanted. I wanted the feeling that gave me. That meant I had got successful. That meant I got security. That meant I got 50 other things. That's actually what I want. Okay.
Yeah.
It might have cost you a car to do that, but we got there.
Yeah. And is that how you started listening to yourself? Was it really like, were you actively questioning, or was it by listening to yourself that those questions came?
It's, for me, it was the point of 37 and a half, which I
Yeah.
think was probably maybe earlier than most or not, I don't know, but it was a point in my life whereby we were losing a company. I was kind of losing my mind in many ways because my formula, I was just, they talk about banging your head off a wall. It's the same thing. I'm running the formula and I'm running it hard. I'm sort of going, if I work more, then, I'll have more. And then, but the problem is if I work more, then I need more staff. And if I need more staff, then I need more problems. So I don't need more, I will get more problems. And you're sitting there going, right, but hold on, if I work harder, my theory has always been if I work hard, I get more, and that's my parents' pattern as well, is going, just do your job, do this, you'll earn the money and you'll get there. And you kind of going, I physically cannot do any more time in the day. I can't do any more work in the day, to the point, I mean, I'm well past efficient. I'm probably working at like 20% efficiency there, but I'm wrapped up in my own head in terms of going, I'm busy, I'm trying hard, I'm pushing here, and I'm reading this or doing that and all the rest, until the expression for me that really resonates is, from great overwhelm, and that's me at a point of overwhelm, comes great change. Because eventually the curtain shuts. Mentally you start shutting the door and going, I need to isolate, I need to cut off, because I can't think straight. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know whether this is, it's a bit like the Matrix. Am I in the Matrix? Am I not in the Matrix? Inception is another great movie. It's like, what level am I on? Am I in? You don't know, because you're so far from your values. You're so far trying to, juggle the houses, juggle the cars, juggle the kids, juggle everything else. You just don't know who you are. So you're so far off mark. You're kind of going, I don't have a North Star. I don't have a golden thread. I don't know what I'm passionate about. Frankly, I'd just be happy to sleep. Isolation, funnily enough. I just, you ask a lot of parents, what would you like for Christmas? Well, a break or time off or sleep, or, sleep would be lovely. Funny enough, sleep is actually, our conscious or unconscious ability to shut the body down, shut down external inputs, shut all that. And why do we go in a coma? Simply because the body's going, I can actually heal myself better than you can. So frankly, you're our crazy driver. You are driving this bus like a lunatic. I need to shut you down. I need to isolate you for now. We need to go into sort of a safe space, and computers do it and all the rest. We're in safe mode. We're in, it's sort of the screen of death on a lot of computers, in terms of going, we just need to go back to basics here. We need to sort of break it all down. And that sort of deafening question, which people can hear, but so they won't hear until they're ready, is, what do you want? And that is so, so powerful. When you think about it and you go, if you want to do 7 levels deep in that, so the exercise, and go, what do you want? Why do you want that? Why do you want that? So for me, and I'll openly say it, and I've talked a little bit about it before in terms of the podcast. So ultimately the podcast for me was a little bit of recognition, ego too. I get to have great conversations. Why do I want a great conversation? Well, it's a connection. Why do I want connection? I want love. Why do I want love? Because it's something that's missing from my life. And that's not to say, it's something from my past. It's a void that I have there. And again, nature abhors a void. So suddenly it's kind of going, do you know what? Things that have happened in my past, losing parents, things like that. And I don't even know it's that. I think it's before that. There's something, and it could be the most basic of things, as a child, and not that my parents ever would have, but it's a simple comment going like that. Well, my own child says to me, is like, if you don't do that, I won't love you. Okay. And you kind of amplify that forward through 37 and a half years, and you kind of go, I can kind of see how you could get to that conclusion. And I'm not saying that that was the case for me, but you take the amplification process, you take the compounding process, and you suddenly go, actually, it's kind of a miracle you're not a bag of nerves right now, and you're not sort of locked up and God knows what else, So you can kind of, again, it's the whole thing with kids. It's the whole thing with, what we're told as kids and all the rest, and people sort of say, well, the kids it doesn't really matter. They won't remember this anyway. Well, they do, consciously they don't remember. But again, I come back to the whole thing. 11 million bits of information going in per second, give or take. 50 bits going in per second consciously. So we remember 50 bits, the color of the screen, what's going on, the sound, the noise, and all that's sort of in our conscious area. And that's, that's our conscious connection. Whereas on the other connection, it's just a different world, and you could do it with anyone now and saying, right, well, okay, let's give a list of your friends, Heather, and all your connections, and you will feel different about every connection. So we might say a good friend from school. So straight away I pre-framed it as a good friend. So it's there, right? That you'll feel that way about them, your mummy, your daddy, connections, siblings, brothers, all the rest. And you'll have different levels of connection with everyone. And when you try and smash that up, or you try and sort of introduce potentially this friend to this friend, they don't get on. Or you try and introduce yourself to yourself, and you're kind of going, no, I can't be doing with you. And it's just so crazy.
Talk a bit more about that. You try to introduce yourself to yourself.
Well, in terms of your external self, for me at that time with 37 and a half, I mean, the noise in my head was just, as flat out. And I talked briefly about it before in terms of me would be having this conversation. Myself sitting here on my left shoulder, myself was here chatting away. And that was my sort of, oh yeah, right. Okay. Look at you, look at what you're doing. It's the inner language and it's brutal. It knows how to push your buttons, and it's there. And that's, to me, that was sort of the equivalent of the inner critic. And, when I sort of see it, that's what I see. And this was sort of this little thing that sat off my shoulder. And again, it was like, well, you could try to change, but listen, I know you tried that in the past and you failed, or yeah, you don't really mean that, or, and it was just sort of constantly gnawing away. And when you're that far from your values, your true self, you don't know what's real, what's not. You don't know what level of the matrix you're in. You don't know, is this person upsetting me? Are they pleasing me? I don't know. And you kind of got to go back to basic feeling. And you kind of going, how do I feel? Right, close my eyes when I'm with this person. How do I feel? It's like, I actually don't feel good, and so you have on that side, and that's the point I was at. It was just, everything was noisy. I couldn't think for thinking. There's so many permutations and anxiety, and I want this and he wants this, and I don't know, and what do I want, and I, what sort of a person are you for not knowing what you want, and that's a sort of a spiraling relationship with yourself. You kind of go, oh, look at you can't even decide what you want. What do you want? Oh, you don't know what you want. Okay, what, and I can see why people would go crazy in that loop. It's there.
I think you've said that really well. Like, it was just so noisy, and that even as you were talking, I could feel that, that almost that jamboree in your head that takes you away. How do you listen to yourself? You really don't know. And the noise, like the clangers, the trumpets, and all the difficult noises that just don't even sound good. Remember the clangers?
Yeah.
See, when you were talking there, one of the points you said about like, if your body goes into a coma to heal, and you were talking about like how in the midst of all that noise you had to go within, you had to be silent, you had to even close your eyes and be still to think, how am I feeling here? Which is great that you did that. You took the time, you recognized it, you did it. I think so many people just keep powering through saying, I don't have time to think about that, and I don't have time. And there's consequences, like everything. But one of the things you said there was about how if you go into and I'd never thought of this before, if you are really in a state of great difficulty physically, your body will put you into a coma. Mm-hmm. So who do you think, or where's it getting that message from? What's it listening to if it's shutting off the brain?
The body, well, it's not shutting off your brain, because your brain is your functional part. Your heart, if you go into a coma, or you faint is sort of a nice easy, because I also don't want to bring on talking about coma could bring on a coma as such, but you talk about fainting. Well, it is that adage of, you can't kill yourself by holding your breath, or you can't do yourself damage, because ultimately the body will go, well, you're going to faint here on the floor, and then we'll go back to breathing, because you're the crazy driver. And we kind of need to take you out of action for a while, because you're a lunatic right now. And bang, suddenly the conscious comes back in and says, yeah, okay, right, we're back in control now. Okay, all good. We're all fact-based in terms of, I need you to breathe, you're choosing not to breathe. Okay, we need to isolate you, bye-bye. And right, okay. And is everyone, yeah, we're all good. Because bearing in mind, it's just doing exactly what it is. It's a computer. It was told to do this, it does this. It's told to do that, it does with that. Now that can be good or that can be bad. That can be crazy programming, kind of go, why would you run that program? So you do this, this, and this destructive things happen. It's like, well, hey, listen, don't shoot the messenger. This is what I was told to do. That's all happening in your head, you know. I do X, Y, and Z because that will please such and such. And you kind of go, yeah, but you don't feel good about this. Yeah, but it pleases them, and therefore they love me more, and therefore I get connection. And listen, it all kind of works out in the rounding, you know, until eventually you go, really? I don't know if I want to do that anymore, you know, and I got to check the formula. So we kind of we need the driver to turn around and go, hold on, what sort of a bus have I been driving? You know, is anyone on this bus for a start? You know, what's going on? And then you sort of look back and go, right, well, what's the status of the bus? You know, because if you're driving a bus that's sort of lost all its windows and half the sides hanging off and it's crazy and it's, you know, it's in bits and pieces and you kind of go, oh, okay, I'm maybe not that good a driver right now. So I might need to just go and learn a few things about how to, you know, get things back together. I need to do a bit of self-repair, a bit of self-discovery until you can start rebuilding and say, right, okay, what works best? What's, you know, what am I built and desired to do? You know, how can I do this? How can I streamline me? How can I feel normal? Your ultimate aim in terms of the bus analogy is to get yourself into the most streamlined, smooth, efficient bus that you can get onto the motorway, knowing where you're going, setting out the optimum speed, setting out, you know, which the optimum speed is not 90 miles an hour. The optimum speed is about 56 miles an hour, whatever it is. So it's not a crazy speed. It's kind of going, if I could do more, but if you did 56 miles an hour, day in, day out, consistently, all the time, as opposed to being an erratic driver and starting and rearing off down the road. It's hare and tortoise stuff here. You know, it's not complicated, but it's kind of just going, if you do that every day, it's the compounding effect. It's doing the 5 things a day effect. It's, you know, you just sit on the motorway at 56 miles an hour again and again and again and again and again. It's not tiring because you're not wearing yourself out. You know, it's quite peaceful in terms of you're not sort of giving yourself panic. You're not sort of rearing up on traffic and there's stuff's happening around you and people are overtaken, but that's okay because you're happy with where you are. You've agreed that's your goal. And suddenly you kind of going, yeah, okay, my passengers are happy. The bus is in good condition. The driver's okay. You know, we're all happy enough. Nothing crazy or strange is happening and it's really good. Until someone decides, well, actually, I want to go a bit faster, or something else happens, and then suddenly you start going, right, the bus goes a bit erratic again. But you kind of go, and if you can find that point of, you know, that silence, that, you know, where it's kind of going, you know, I can't remember who the artist is, but I could drive all night. You know, it's that, you know, it is that thing is what could you do just constantly is just, it brings you, you know, it's no resistance, it's easy, it's there, you know, yes, okay, you need to stop now and again, but you know, it's very sustainable, you know, long term. You get it, you feel good, you know, you're relaxed, it's something you're natural at. You're achieving a hell of a lot because you're doing it consistently, day in, day out. You're traveling at the 56 miles an hour. You are just constantly over and over and over again until you look back and you go, holy moly, we've traveled some distance here because, you know, one, we're on the right path, we know where we're going, we're doing it day in, day out, we actually understand what we are. You know, I feel good because it's not tiring where I'm at. I'm using the right language. Our passengers are happy. I'm happy, and life's great. You kind of go, why don't I just do that? And that's long story short in terms of where I was at and kind of going, I was driving around like a crazy man with this bus up, you know, sort of city streets and, you know, dinging off cars and bits were falling off here. And it's like, oh, it's okay. I got to keep driving. I got to keep driving. When you've got youth, you can do that. You can kind of bull on through. You can say, right, just keep going, keep going, keep going, you know, and that's fine. That sort of hard approach, but that hard approach when you don't actually know what you're driving or, you know, you're going at a wall, you know, when you actually need a little hammer, you've got this mallet and you're bashing the hell out of it. Nothing good's going to happen. Ultimately, it's something's going to get wrecked and it's not, you know, they're not going to complement each other. So something has to give in terms of the wall or the hammer or you or whatever. So for me, that was almost a breaking point. And I didn't do that consciously. I'm not even going to take the credit for that. Maybe it was all subconscious in terms of that manifested for me in terms of depression. That manifested for me in terms of isolation. That manifested for me in terms of losing my tooth, you know, in terms of stress. And unless I still have a missing tooth there. And ironically, it was kind of going, that was all the stress built up in me. until my body sort of starts actually getting rid of pieces of itself, as in my tooth, you know, and you know, it's a bit of a metaphor in some ways, but also it's kind of going, it's a stark reminder to me in terms of going, my body will actually take over here, you know, and bits will start falling off, you know, if you don't take care of the bus. And it's a very, very telltale sign, you know. Is it unusual that people who are unhappy are, you know, they've got bad complexion, they've got poor hair, they're overweight, they're not, you know, there's 50 things they're not doing, and they're the first ones to go, well, look at you, you know, look at you, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you know. And again, they're sort of looking back at their own bus and going, why are all my passengers so fat and so unhealthy? And so look at you, you're doing this, kind of going, yeah, because you're kind of making them nervous the way you're driving. You know, it's like, if you just calm down, you told them we're going from, you know, Scotland to London, or you going from wherever to, you know, Paris to Madrid, or whatever the song is. You know, if you just tell people that, and listen, we're not going to go crazy. We're going to do 56 miles. We're going to do it day in, day out. I want everyone to be safe. I want to make sure we're all comfortable. We'll stop at regular times to get comfort breaks, so we're good to each other and we're nice and everything's normal, and you know what to expect. Do you think your passengers, do you think you are suddenly going to go, okay, I feel listened to, I feel valued, I feel safe, I know what's going to happen, you know, they've told me we're going to stop, we're going to do this, you know, I'm not going to drive like a crazy dude, you know, I'm going to do sort of things that I expect, and I'm going to, you know, organize myself so I know that this is the next bit, and I can map out my X number of times ahead. So suddenly you can kind of, the body just goes, oh, okay, that's good. Yeah. Okay. I feel good. How do you feel? I feel great. Actually, I feel really good. I know what's
We'll keep
happening.
some teeth. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and suddenly then you're not holding weight, because you're not sitting there going, Jesus, right, I need to stock up on food because something might happen in case this crazy dude drives into a wall and we need to store energy. And, or, you know, I don't need to be anxious because I know what's happening, you know, because before he keeps doing random stuff and getting in trouble with stuff, you know.
You had started listening to yourself.
Yeah. And
And
that's,
more than that, you know, you were doing what you were hearing.
yeah, and that's, I mean, ultimately, I believe everyone has that golden thread running through them. That, call it a bus, call it a North Star, call it whatever works for you. It really doesn't matter. You know, some people say, what's your purpose? What's your passion? What's your
You know,
mission?
your
What's your
fire in the
vision?
belly. Yeah.
What's your,
Yeah.
exactly, your fire in the belly, you know, and, you know, your gut instinct is almost the way that you do stuff, but actually what do you want to do, you know, in terms of, you know, what do you want? I come back to that question of, you know, what's it all about? You know, because you strip off everything else, the, you know, school holidays, life, overdrafts, friends, he said, she said, I didn't say, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. You strip all that back. And that's kind of probably why, interestingly, and probably subconsciously, I have a bit of a connection to the whole near-death experience type thing, as in I find it, what's it called? Anita Morjani, I think it is, the book Dying to Be Me. And there's something when she's, because I listen to books, and when she's talking about that, the peace and quiet, she's saying at the moment of pretty much her body was done, you know, shut down and ready to just basically leave, you know, that sort of meat suit, you know, the if you like, it's done, it's done its work. Where actually, and then the brain and you know, the brain stays as well, because the brain is just the sort of the operator for the body, but it's the mind and the soul, you know. And again, different people have different views on this, but that's the point when they all separate. It's kind of going, you know, the spirit of you potentially, if it's your thing, will sort of leave or separate, you know. So because people say, well, the body's here but the mind's elsewhere, or the soul, you know. But again, I'm not going to get into that, simply because different people have different beliefs. But that moment, and they talk about that at that moment of, you just let go of everything. It's like a stark realization, you know, when something, it's like post adrenaline fatigue. After something has happened, a lot of people need to sit down and go, I feel kind of faint. You know, it's almost, it's a moment of kind of enlightenment too. It's just like letting go of everything, you know. Suddenly things that were maybe anxious, or something they thought was going to happen, when something happens, you know, when you've kind of gone, I thought that was going to happen, and it happened, and suddenly you just, you know, you can either drain or be filled with positivity, because suddenly all those loose ends that were hanging about suddenly cluck into place, and it goes from being a thought or a thing into fact. It's happened. Now you can different interpretations of how it's happened, but that's almost why suddenly, when people do a parachute jump, and quite often it's something they wanted to do for years, they hit the ground, and the kind of elation, absolute exhaustion, wiped out, because so many things. It's been a massive surge of energy. It's been a massive dreams and what ifs and anxiety and 50 things and how am I going to feel and all this, and then suddenly just this emotional crash. Well, same way I suppose with when things start to come together for you as well. It's in terms of you just have this alignment, and suddenly people go, okay, it's a moment of that silence, and you kind of going, that's weird. I for so long I wanted this, or and again, it could be your midlife opportunity, where you've bought the Porsche, or you've done whatever, and you suddenly have it and going, I don't know what to do anymore. My values are changed. What do I do now? It's silent. I've wanted this for so long. This is all I focused on. This is all I wanted, and this is all. And I hadn't actually thought what happens behind this. I was like, I don't even want the bloody car. I don't even, I didn't. Did I want to jump out of the plane? I was searching for me. I was searching for what it is. And I say, if you're not careful, and people are going, I don't know. I sort of toy with the theory: is it any wonder that people get to retirement age and die very quickly after that? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, is it because they're passionate about their jobs? Well, I think if you're passionate about your jobs, and the kind of the Japanese principle and the ikigai, which I've talked about before, but that's kind of going, you'll work till you die. And that's not a negative way. You work because you're passionate. You're fulfilling your potential. You're fulfilling your purpose. That is a very, very positive way of living. Whereas functionally, for a lot of people, they're kind of going, I'll work till the retirement pot's here, and then we'll do this. And once I retire, once I stop, once I do this, once, then suddenly it's kind of going, oh, bloody hell, what do I do now? I don't know what to do.
And is it that, do you think it is that sometimes people will say it's because it wasn't that it was a job, it was their reason for being in the world, it became them, or they, not that it became them, but they felt that's who they were rather than what they did?
I think it's suspended in a really, I don't know if I'd use the word dangerous. It's suspended in a very disappointing place. And I mean that by in the gap in terms of who you are, as in who everyone recognizes you are and all the rest, and who you truly are. So I know Tony Robbins and that talks about the inner warrior guys and things like that. We want to be different things at different times, and we all, there's times you want to just scream and you kind of go, that's actually who you are potentially, or that's a pent up version of you. But when you have, like, and why I go back to that advert, and that Honda advert is kind of when you're suspended at the point of okay, how's your work? Yeah, okay. Oh, Jesus, like, and even now I'm like going, there should only be two answers in this flowchart of life.
Oh, yeah.
This flowchart of life should say either definitely yes or hell no. There shouldn't be, there shouldn't be an okay box. Now I'm not going to, people do things because they have to, or they believe they have to, and all 50 different things. But in terms of, if you were living in terms of a fire in the belly, and you were listening to you and it's kind of going, right, do you want to go swimming? No. Okay. Whereas before I might have gone, oh, do you want to go swimming? Oh, you do? Okay. Well, let's go. Yeah, that's fine. And all the rest, whereas you kind of going, is that going to serve me? Is that what I want? How do I feel about that? Yeah. And vice versa. 2 seconds later, you might go, actually, do you know what? That's not for me, but thank you anyway. Happy to do something else if you fancy that. It's just swimming for me is not comfortable, whatever,
Yeah, whatever it
is. Totally lost my train of thought. But anyway, so having all those things where you are, just deciding what you want to do, what is going on in terms of retirement, and being held in that space where, a salary is deadly, because it's, my father had a, I don't know if I say this out loud, but well, I can. He sort of, with the tax man, you should pay them enough to stave the hunger, but not enough to make them fat. Okay. If the tax man's listening, he paid all his taxes. Everything was 100%. But it's a great policy of life, really, instead of going, how much energy are you giving in terms of, to friends and other people, and saying enough to maintain the connection if it's a positive connection, but not enough to actually make the relationship fat and unhealthy and things like that, So, pay the right amount. That's the key. So being in an okay state, it's like, I'm okay. My job is okay. Your life, how do you feel? Okay. Your body physique, okay. What do you want to do? Okay. And that's why I love bucket lists, because it kind of totally bypasses. If you're talking to someone about their bus, and I don't know why I keep coming back to bus, but if you talk about their bus and then you sort of go, I want to talk to you about the Hyperloop or this bullet train. It's like a whole different mode of transport. It's kind of funky. And suddenly the brain's like going, what? Oh, that sounds cool. So you leave behind all the limitations and kind of structures and roads and beliefs and everything else. I could travel at 300 miles an hour. Why the hell am I driving this bus? Okay, well, I kind of need to, because that's when the butt comes in. But, I've got a mortgage to pay and I've got to look after the kids, and, but society wants me to do this. And you know what? I was never any good at that anyway. And this happened and that happened and all the rest, and kind of going, yeah, do you know what? Bullet trains and future transports, that's for somebody else, dreams. And yeah, do you know what? I tell you what I'm going to do. Even worse, I'm going to project it onto my kids. I had a shitty time. I had a few things. I had some stuff happen to me, but I'm going to be a real warrior. I'm going to bury that deep in me, and I'm going to show a brave face, and I'm going to give my kids everything I didn't have. Great. How's that going to work out? And you can just feel it and just go, oh, fuck me, right, okay. Okay, so the driver of our bus is now depressed and pissed off and secretly going, it's okay for everyone else, but here's me, the hero, the martyr. I'm doing it, and I've swallowed my pride, and I've sacrificed everything for you and all this. Do you think that's gonna get unhealthy? Eventually they're gonna go, when the kids turn around and going, I'm leaving you, whatever, I'll see you the other side. I don't know if you love me anyway and all that, and some throwaway comment, and you're kind of going, screw you. I've given up everything. I quit my life. You don't realize what I've done for you. You don't realize all the things I've sheltered you from, all blah, 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 blah. And the kids are going, what are you talking about?
Didn't ask you to. Yeah. How are they going to learn? And who asked you to do that? That very much. See there though, like you were saying about, and I'm wondering, is like whenever you start to listen to yourself, you were saying about like the company was coming to an end.
Mm-hmm.
You had run into a state of depression.
Mm-hmm.
All things that people will understand. Not everyone's had a company, but most people have lost a job or been under threat of redundancy or something. The
common thing in my head at that time, I suppose, was, what if? And that, looking at people around you, and that's what we do as humans, we compare. And that's how we sort of tell most. And when you're looking at someone else and going, that bugger has a bigger car than me, and I work harder than him or her, and they're doing this. And of course, at this point, I'm sort of consciously trying to circulate and circulate with people who have more, again, up that sort of food chain a bit. And after you go, well, we all have the same time in the day, whatever time is, but we all have the same slot in the day. I don't believe they're Superman in terms of physically having a cape and having exponential conscious powers, let's put it that way. So you kind of go, there's something wrong with this formula. And when it is the Jinx in the Matrix, is kind of the lady in red, for anyone that's watched the Matrix, there's just something wrong. It's kind of going, something's not adding up here. I can't bang my head any further on the wall because it's bloody hurting, and it's like I'm at a point of overwhelm. I'm, mentally, physically, everything else. And I don't know what I want, because, people going, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want? And I'm going, well, I don't know what I want. And you not telling me what I want. And I followed you long enough, and this is where I've ended up. And, blame, and poor me. And, and you isolate and you do all that. But eventually this sort of whisper, and again, for me, it was the whisper of sort of the subconscious. And just when you start going, what if? There's key things like, was there a pivotal moment? There's several. It's kind of the Jim Carrey, and the yes man. Very simple concept. And like, I can kind of love or loathe Jim Carrey as an actor, and sort of craziness, but actually the very simple thing of going, what if you said yes? What if, you know, it's like, well, you're a bit embarrassed and actually that's not the way you do it. Well, okay. Well, what if you did one little thing a day? You know, 1% change. So for 14.4 minutes, which is 1% of a day, for 14.4 minutes every day, if you did something a little bit different, tried something new, and you just stepped out and you said, right, well, okay, for 14.4 minutes, I'm going to read a book. Okay, haven't done that in a while and whatever else. It's something new. Or ideally, if you can get your 14.4 minutes to be, I'm going to do something actually that is replicating. So if you're in business, you might say, well, listen, I'm going to assign a task to somebody else and I'm going to take my 14.4 minutes to actually assign them, tell them how it's done. You know, it's tomorrow, I have another 14.4 minutes, but that first 14.4 minutes is still working for me. It's still passive. It's still going. It's still, I built a system, I built a tool, I built something in place that will actually help it change and grow. And then you do that the next day. And then you send in your 14.4 minutes, you send 5 recommendations or 5 emails to people, you know, and it's kind of going, hi, would you like to connect? Hi, would you like to do this? How would you like to do this? How would you like to do this? Well, you can't unsend them. So the next day when you're on your next 14.4 minute slot, well, suddenly chances are someone from the first 14.4 minutes has started to respond. The system that you've, you know, the tool that you assigned to somebody else, well, that's continued going as well. Can you see how stuff starts to compound? You know, and actually, like, I need to get the figure straight, but it's something like you will have changed through compounding by changing 1% a day, 14.4 minutes of the day, you will have changed 300 times in terms of what your core belief or your core potential was at that time, or your core activities that you're outputting, you know, because your potential is completely different because you're only starting to scratch that. So in terms of what you were doing, where you were at on day one, and then you keep doing your 1%, your 14.4 minutes, and you keep doing that. And that needs to be held in a very safe space. So that's not 14.4 minutes in terms of going, I'll make another phone call or, you know, chat. It needs to be productive, as in it needs to be sort of future generating tasks in terms of, you know, it's a system, it's a tool, it's something different. You know, it's kind of heading towards, as we would know it in terms of C-type goal. But it's something that is kind of going, okay, it could be setting up a calendar, or it could be setting up an email template, or it could be picking up the phone to a solicitor or doing something and just sowing the seed on their side. Phone to the solicitor, hi, I need to make a will. Okay. Well, that thought has now, and that action has now taken place, that connection has taken place. They will then go into action and do that. So that's not taking any more of their day because you've now assigned or you've now put that across to them. Or it could be someone else where, you know, being an actual driver, you know, so not, I'm not saying 14.4 minutes of social media intake, you know, because that's exactly that. You're not listening. You are listening, but you're taking on other people's stuff. You're not listening to yourself. So 14.4 minutes of listening to you and kind of go, what I want. And it could be as simple as going for a walk. You know, it could be as simple as sitting, do you know what? I'm going to sit here on this seat for 14.4 minutes. I'm not going to answer the phone. I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to give myself 14.4 minutes in the day. And you kind of go, well, it's only 14 minutes. Like, yeah, I know. But imagine what could happen. What if I did this every day? You know, like a muscle sort of builds up.
So now we've talked about kind of around the power of being listened to and the opportunity and the what if. What's the danger of not being listened to? Or maybe danger's putting it too, sorry, I'm leading with that. What would you see, what do you see when people aren't being listened to or aren't listening to themselves?
If I'm being particular, there's multiple questions and layers in there. So, you know, what happens if someone's not listened to? Frankly, death. That is the most extreme, you know, as we know it in terms of the physical body. You know, now you can go into other realm stuff and what happens consequently outside of that. You know, how many people, and I sort of go into this slightly cautiously in terms of, you know, in suicide and things like that, and going, just nobody was listening to me. The very core and purpose of what Samaritans and other listening charities do, and talk charities and talk therapies and all that is simply down to going, we're here to listen. You know, I believe that's one of the opening lines of the Samaritans. I'm thankfully very grateful I've never had to use the service, but I'm also incredibly grateful that the service is there for people, you know, and not just going, we're here to listen. I mean, that's the most basic fundamental form, right? You know, and people going, I am at such a stage in my life. Sorry, I was getting a bit emotional. It's such a stage in my life where actually it's so bad that it's either this or taking a decision and deciding that I need someone to listen, or else there's a consequence, a very, very black and white consequence. So that's the most extreme thing, really, you know. So,
well, you've hit on something very powerful. I mean, I've seen so many posts recently, as I'm sure many people have, especially with everything that's going on in the world, and so many of them are around suicide and about the importance of listening, as you've said. And you know, a lot of them have that juxtaposition. They have, like, on the one hand, on one side they'll have, after suicide, we wish they'd told us, we wish we'd listened. On the other side, the wants that are there and the things, and there are things that as society and as people we can learn from, the more that we are willing to listen to those messages and start to understand. And any wonder you've got emotional, because the very fact that for so many of us, it's coming to that point where you're not able to listen to yourself, which is terrifying if you've ever experienced it. And you've spoken about it really, really well, about how frightening the noise, the not knowing what to do, having to isolate, having to shut down, because there's no choice. And if at those points we're not able to listen to ourselves, or we don't have someone to listen, it's an extremely important point.
and it's people will understand points of that in their life in different levels. And excuse me, it's almost what can be almost as disappointing is when someone goes, I'm not being listened to, and someone does listen to them to a point, but listened in terms of effectively listening and empowering them in such a way. Because if you just empower them back to okay, you know, that doesn't, you know, that's very much like, I'm back to massaging the jellyfish. It's kind of going, you're just playing around with a symptom. You know, you've just kind of gone, you feel better? Yeah, you okay now? I'll leave you now because I've listened. Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
and it is, I feel good that I've listened to you. I feel, you know, you feel listened to, and you know, I've sort of talked you down off the edge, and you know, we're all okay here, right? You're okay? Okay, so I can tick, done. But the formula hasn't changed. You know, so it's only a matter of time before you rerun the same beliefs, patterns, everything else that got you there in the first place. You know, and that's why, again, I mean, I would say at this point, I'm not a trained counselor. I'm not, you know,
No.
my qualifications are, you know, not in that field at all. And you know, apart from sort of life qualifications and listening to people as much as I can. But unless you bring them to a point of going, what's your passion? What's your reason? You know, and one day last week, and you know, I on an interview, and someone, it was potentially an incredibly dangerous question, and I knew it was there, and it was premeditated in terms of, you know, and it would need to be listened in context. But the question ultimately was, why don't you just kill yourself? And you know, a lot of people are going, Jesus, you didn't ask that, did you? It's like, yes, I did. And the person, you know, they accepted the question, and the response was, that is one of the best questions I've ever been asked, and the most relevant. In that moment, we got down to, simply because I have so much to do, and there's so much I want to do, that I want to live. And you kind of going, brilliant. Okay. It's a dangerous question, because a lot of people will be going, okay, what if you trigger them? What if you do this? What if you do this? You know, and it wasn't, listen to the interview. I mean, this is an hour into an interview, and it's, you know, there's rapport, there's reasons and all that. You know, do I accept it was potentially dangerous? Absolutely. You know, would I do it all the time? No. But I'm sort of saying, for me, I was leading by what I felt was right in terms of their language, their response, their energy. And actually, it was, you know, sometimes you need a pattern break. You know, sometimes you just need someone to go, "What are you doing? What? What do you mean?" It's enough to sort of it's that shock, and suddenly it can be someone completely different. It can be, you know, something else that just kind of, Jesus, what, you know, it's like, kind of, what just happened there? You know, that dazed out of a coma, and that shock may be enough to actually almost jumpstart the senses and kind of going, I need to change my life. I need to do something. I don't care what anyone else thinks anymore. I don't, you know, I've had enough. From that point of great overwhelm, and almost if the overwhelm's not enough, and it's so hard, you know, in terms of saying, do you need to see the dark to see the light? You know, the ultimate thing would be going, do you know what, Heather, I know you're not feeling great today, so I'm gonna give you this experience, I'm gonna give you this pill, and, you know, all the stuff and the pain that I've learned to live on and lean on, and my reasons why and all that, that's in that pill. Take that, and then 100% away you go. And that's great. If you could save people from all that, Jesus, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful? You know, it would sort of let them, you know, let go of all the belief and all that actually people were telling them they weren't good enough as a kid. And do you know what? Abuse is almost a word we don't recognize because we see that as very physical and things like that. It could be the simplest words of in the playground going, I don't want to be your friend. You know, it's as basic as that, you know, and am I going to label?
Validation.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are you going to abuse, you know, label that as abuse? No, it's even too soft to call it bullying. Just not being nice. You know, that wasn't very nice. Okay, well, that's almost the mildest form that you can get. It's just suddenly kind of going, I felt this, you cut off my feelings, or you know, you completely, um, you know, change my polarity, my beliefs, my values at that single point in time by saying something that didn't resonate. I was sort of open and honest and very vulnerable to you, or not vulnerable, just in a very gentle and innocent way. And you reacted completely different to the way I thought you would. Therefore, bang, the seed is sown. You don't want to play with me. Da 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 da. Please, Eugene. And I'm not saying, I mean, this is completely fictitious, but I'm saying that could happen. You can see how we ultimately get wrapped up in our own world, and we replay, you know, until it gets to the point of going, what do, you know, what do I want? What do I need? You know, to that moment before the, you know, what if, you know, someone says, well, I don't want to be your friend. Well, maybe it's simply because they're jealous. They actually really like you. Do you know, and we reframe, we can change history in our mind. You know, you look back and they do this through NLP and a number of techniques, but you go back and saying, right, and the mind is amazing because you kind of go, right, close your eyes. I want you to go back to 10 minutes before that. What were you feeling? And people can bring it up like that. You know, so I was feeling good. I was looking at the lines in the playground. I was all right, you know, and it's like, okay, I want you now to look from above. So not in terms of inside yourself. I want you to look above. What would we have seen in terms of, there's a child sitting there happy enough, happy-go-lucky, looking on their friends and all the rest and feeling great in the world. And you go into the event. I don't want to be your friend. Bang. You know, suddenly there, that's what happened. Right. How do you feel? I just did it there myself, even subconsciously, you know,
Yeah.
shoulders drop, head goes down. Oh, okay. Disappointment, you know, everything suddenly is woof, this wave of feeling has just come in. And this is a playground now. This is nothing serious. Well, I say nothing serious. I mean,
Oh wow.
you see what happened. You know,
Yeah, it's very serious when you're that. It's your whole world. Yeah.
it's the butterfly effect, you know, it's just, you
Yeah.
know, but then, you know, so the language just suddenly with NLP, you might go back, or with any of the techniques, you might go back and say, well, you know, what if they were jealous of you? Or, you know, maybe it was
Somebody had
just,
said it to them 2 minutes before, more
yeah.
likely. Yeah, it's just
And
passing
listen,
it around.
why do we inflict pain on other people? Because quite often we're in pain. You know, a wounded animal will bite. You know, you could have a favorite pet that's been loyal and loving their entire life. And suddenly in a moment of, you know, sickness, illness, desperation, fear, scare, whatever, will turn around and bite you.
Mm.
You know, and that's not a judgment, you know, of the animal. That is just you know, their values, their everything is
Circumstance,
being done, you know,
environment.
and it's so hard. I mean, when you get to nursing and things like that, and I know with my own mother, and through her, I mean, she had breast cancer, and with 11 months of going through that, unfortunately, to death, and you know, but through the drugs and the change in who she was and all that, she stopped recognizing us. And that's so hard. Not only are you watching somebody, their body physically fall apart, you know, and be infected, and just everything that goes with that. So your mind doesn't forget, and it's so hard when you've taken someone through an illness to remember the person before, because the brain's just, it's just overload. But then when almost the most insulting thing is, and you know, you'll see it with Alzheimer's, you'll see it with all, you'll know this better than any, you know, that whole, when the person doesn't recognize you, it's like, that's such a stab in the heart. You know, it's kind of like, I don't want to be your friend anymore. When this person that you recognize them, you know their features, you hear them, you feel them, you can sense them and everything else, and suddenly they're going, I don't want to be your friend anymore, or Alzheimer's or something else. I'm going, who are you? You know, suddenly, like, Jesus, you know, all my beliefs, everything I've stacked up and believed on up to now has suddenly just exploded, you know. I'm getting emotional again, but
I know, any wonder. And there's such big themes and things that we go through as people. Um, and see there when you were talking like about the somebody not recognizing, I know the thing that we were taught, not the thing, but the research would have shown, and one of the messages we were always trying to get out in particular around dementia was, if it comes to that point, you know, if someone due to can be due to the drugs they're going through, it's not even always a dementia, it could be like a sickness or an illness, but if, especially when has come to the dementia, we would always have been kind of saying to people to focus on how you're making the person feel, because although they mightn't recognize you, you can still bring good feelings for them. So there was a woman I worked with, and her aunt had stopped recognizing her. She was very close to her aunt, I should say. And her aunt had stopped recognizing her as her niece. But this niece did all of the household things. So the aunt's husband was dead, but she always organised for the grass to be cut. She organised for the window cleaner to come, the painter to come. And her aunt actually started calling her by her husband's name, because the feeling that she brought to her aunt, although she didn't recognise her, was feelings of being looked after, being protected, being cared for, sorting stuff out, the things that traditionally men would quite often do. And she was like, why is she thinking I am this? You know, it was very confusing for her. Whenever we looked at, she sat down and she thought about how she was making her aunt feel, it made perfect sense. And the relationship took on a different and a new quality. A very beautiful one, very different, very new.
well, that's, I mean, and there you go. You come back to being listened to. I mean, if someone, you know, in that, and almost there, again, their brain is almost going into the whole sort of self-preservation mode and kind of going, okay, we need to change things up here because, you know, the body is failing or something else is happening.
Yeah.
But for them to recognize you in terms of, as you say, someone that's safe, or they're kind of go, oh, hello, you know, and you're like going, but they use the wrong name or something else. But it's like kind of going, isn't that beautiful that, you know, yes, okay, it's not on the physical plane, you know, in terms of the face, the body and all that, but can you imagine, you know, that you've invoked these feelings in someone, that they feel secure, they recognize you, it's a warm connection, you know, because they welcome you with warmth generally.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well,
it's
yeah.
safe, you know, they're not afraid when they say, oh God, you know, who's this or whatever. It's a very warm, and you kind of going, okay, we maybe aren't on the conscious physical world anymore, you know, but how beautiful is it to have this warmth of this connection with this person, you
Yeah.
know, and to be able to, they're listening to me in terms of the energy that I'm giving off, and who I am is bringing them a sense of warmth and caring and all that, you know. Would you rather have not be that way? Of course, but you know what, it's almost a more beautiful connection because they've gone back to a childlike state, they've gone back to basics, they've gone back to, you know, happy times. I mean, you know, I mean, through with Alzheimer's, quite often they go back to a place in their childhood or somewhere like
Yeah.
that, and
Quite often, yeah. Talk about it like a bookcase, you know, they
yeah,
kind of go down the years, yeah.
you know,
And by that token, you know, you were talking about the playground, you know, some of those things can be difficult for people. Like I know, like people, maybe they lived in a boarding school as a child and then they're going into a care home. Now, if they had a great experience, brilliant. If they had a horrible experience in a boarding school, it's going to be very much more difficult for them. You know,
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
but when you sort of strip off all the weight and all the stuff that's gone on in between, good, bad, indifferent, and all the rest, and you can change the polarity of that. Like I say, you go back to the playground incident, it could be something someone said, it could be anything else, or it could be that moment of calmness, peace from overwhelm, and I'm back to that statement of from great overwhelm comes great change. That moment when you kind of going, I cannot keep going on at this the way it is. This formula is broke. I am broke. Something about the way I do things is not working for me. It's not working for me as a person, hence why I'm here. Something is not quite right in that sequence, and it could be the smallest thing in terms of someone, it could be something, somehow, it could be anything, and it's different for everyone. And it doesn't mean you take one pill and you do this or you change that and bang, oh, there we are. I found myself 100%, it's
We're friends. Hello.
it can be enough to take you back, and it may well be the first step is, okay, how are you today? I'm okay. Okay. As long as that's okay and we're on a journey, or it's okay
Yes.
and we're on a path, this is a process, and to coin a lot of, the American thing is saying, and I say it in the intro to the show, it's like life is a journey, not a destination. In terms of that, it's kind of going, it is a very much it's built up of experiences and all that. But if you can take on those experiences, choose to see the positive side. So kid in the playground, listen, they didn't know any better. In fact, they may have had something horrific going on in their place at home. And actually that's the way they learned how to communication. It was none of your business. The old statement of mind your own business. And that's not to be rude. It's kind of going, how are you minding in terms of the way you do things? Are you minding the way you view things? Their opinion, their influence on you is none of your business, their ideas, because they're viewing it through their billions of experiences and all the rest. And that's the combination they come out with, which is going to be, we're back to the 4 digits on the PIN card and the PIN code for the bank card. You'd need one change and the connection is not made. But yet that very small thing is enough for 56 million people to operate all the same machines, and yet we might have the same PIN code, who knows, but
We're different bank, different number on the card.
But that's the thing, it's enough to be that actually there is only ever that one connection. There's only you with that card, that number, that person. That is absolutely, unique, and that's why we can't necessarily apply change. We can't necessarily apply something else, but what we can do is listen and say, well, listen, if paint me a picture or tell me or speak to me about what your view is, what's going on, and until you sort of allow people to paint that picture, which ironically you're letting them paint it in their own head, and chances are they're going to figure it out before you do, because they suddenly get this realization going, that moment of, creating that gap and that safe space for people that actually allowed them just to sort of start to process it through and start to, remove all the outside influences and saying, you're safe here, you're good, let's start working this through, and suddenly go, that's what it is. And I go back to going, hold on, I'm still painting. It's like, as the person listening to you, I'm still, and they're like going, do you know what? It's been great. Thank you so much. It's been enlightening. I'm going, what happened? What changed? Well, you're never going to know, because you'd need to explain the billions of reasons why that changed and why that was a problem in the first place and all that. So you almost just need to be, it's enough to be in the safe space. It's enough to provide that environment. How they unravel it in their head and all the rest, just give them the tools, because we're never going to know exactly why. I would need to know everything about you and every experience, and then how you viewed it to be able to see it through your eyes, and you simply can't.
And for them, you don't need to, because they're actually getting what they need. You don't need to be able to, you just need to be holding that space.
And why would you? Because ultimately you're not serving yourself. If you're so busy serving somebody else, do you know what I mean? Eventually going, right, well, whilst you're trying to understand everything about them, to make a proper judgment, you need to have the facts. So that means for me to give you my opinion about you would really mean I would need to do it properly. I would need to know everything. I would need to live your life. And then you kind of go, well, You've not lived your life then. Okay, well, that's a bit of a waste, isn't it? I've spent my entire time trying to live your life, and your life keeps going, and I'm trying to get, and it's just kind of going, mind your own business, and that's,
Very good,
and it's
yeah.
not in a, people see that negatively, and it's not. I mean, treat it in the right way, and look after you, be kind to you, be kind to, everyone you come into contact. Are you perfect? No. Is stuff going to happen? Yes. But if you go with the mindset of going, I am going to do it to the best of my abilities. We put it on my dad's gravestone in terms of live life with no regrets. It's so hard to do. It's a very throwaway comment. It's like a
Yeah.
lot of memes and all the rest. Live life with no regrets, and I can't think. There's billions of them around the world, and pinned up in kitchens and
Full
on.
throttle and all the things that, yeah.
And yet you kind of going, okay, live life with no regrets, and then you almost, to do that very statement on its own, you kind of go, right, to do that, then I need to say yes, but I need to then check how I feel about that, and then check the consequences, and 50 billion things again. So you just kind of got to go, right, I've got to feel that it's right for me. I've got to accept me. I've got to love me. I've got to be okay with me. I can't afford the weight of the baggage of everyone else. So I'm kind of going, my fire in the belly is fire in the belly. It's helping people. It's seeing people switch on. It's that thing of going, oh, I'd love to do that. Okay, we've got the love language, is always a good start. You've got the intake of breath. You've got everything else that goes with it. And you're kind of going, is that your final thing? Maybe, maybe not. And it's okay too, because the old adage of, inside the acorn lives the oak tree, and all those beautiful, sayings.
Yeah.
And you kind of go, but it's enough. It's enough of a seed at this time for it to bring hope, to bring faith, to people going, I have a reason, I have a why. And that's not disassociated onto kids. That's not disassociated onto somebody else or how I love and all that and all the rest. And it's back to almost your childlike quality. And it's kind of going, what do you love to do?
I find that really interesting, because I know for me, kind of in conversation with you the other day, my why, I've tied that quite closely to my children always. And I suppose it was that realization I felt inside myself, but I don't want them to feel that, or to feel obliged or burdened. But of course, in me saying that, I could be creating a sense of obligation. So it's been really interesting to kind of reflect on it over the past few days. And do you see, when you were saying there, if you're happy for me to take us back just briefly a little bit, when you were saying there that it naturally came up in conversation. So one of the things that I find with you is that I feel you always ask the next most obvious question, and that's a really important skill that doesn't always happen in life. So, like, to be able to ask the next most obvious question is it's a gift. So when you were saying there about being able to, you did something there with the gift. I said gift, you thought
I can't remember now.
skill, maybe something happened there. But I'm thinking, if you're happy for me to go back for it and just say if you're not, but when you were talking there about when you're interviewing someone, and you asked the next most obvious question, you asked, why didn't you, or why don't you kill yourself then? And what actually happened, which I find fascinating and to me makes sense in terms of the very thing around suicide awareness. And I'm not a therapist or a counsellor, but in terms of what I've learned in terms of the promotions and work and my own experience, is they always say, ask the person. If you're worried about someone, the natural human instinct is not to ask. That's the most important thing to ask. Are you feeling suicidal right now? Are you having those thoughts? Is this happening for you right now? And then you were saying there about that actually what happened for that person was that they appreciated that question, which to you felt like a risk. But further, was that then, did they start to talk about their why? Is that what was coming? So why did it, but was it their why for life?
I think, going back a little bit, the question, do you feel suicidal? That's an open question. Okay. And I understand, that aspect. So it has that. I suppose for me, that wasn't the risk per se.
No.
The risk came in saying, why don't you just kill yourself? Which again, the problem is you could, and from writing and things like that, that could be, why don't you kill yourself? Exclamation mark.
Yeah.
Why don't you kill yourself? Question mark. So it's tone and context. So it has to be, if you take that in isolation, everyone going, well, that was crazy. It's like, yes, but it's outside of context.
Yeah, well, because it could be a danger. Yeah, because it could be somebody antagonizing someone.
Yeah.
It can be used in that way.
It could be perceived as
why don't you go do
permission, blah, 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 50 different things, on that side. So, so for me, in terms of pointing, in terms of the polarity, I think, so in NLP, you have things called pattern breaks. So simple thing would be like, can you smell coffee? It's like, what are you talking about coffee? So you're basically breaking the cycle. So in that particular conversation, as does happen, people go into washing machine mode. Okay. And especially when you're bounced from therapist to therapist, or you're bounced from, it's this, it's who you think you should be. So you do it in relationships, you do it in so many things. If I do this, he does this, right? And until someone goes, can you smell coffee? What? You've gotten so used to performing away from who you actually are, and then also someone comes in to try to help, and right, okay, here's another therapist, and then there's a question, as the ego steps in and going, I wonder, does this therapist know how to fix me? I don't think they do. Let's do a wee test here. So as a client, as a patient, and again, like I say, I'm not, canceling train, but it's a natural thing where it becomes in the basic form is like a pissing contest. Same, we do it in life. Chimps do it when they meet in nature. People do it and kind of, are you more qualified than me? Or actually, okay, we're just sorting ourselves out. Well, the problem is when you dig around enough in a hole, well, eventually the whole thing just turns to a marsh. It's just kind of go, I don't know. And that's kind of almost where you need to kind of go in with the silver bullet. You kind of go on, this is all going on and we need a pattern break. We need to do something here to just strip right through. And again, hell of a risky question. And like I said, I'm not advocating anyone sort of ask that in that way or anything else at all. But for me, it felt right at that time to ask that question in terms of the noise in the chatter. And, that's the conscious mind and going, I'll say this, and I said this before, and actually, blah, 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 and all this noise that we're being held at the okay level. And when someone just shoots straight through the okay level and go, why don't you just kill yourself? So they go, Jesus, what? And they're kind of going, because I don't want to. I have a reason. And it was just a moment of poof, and just cut through all the crap and everything else and all the excuses and the, beliefs and everything else. And it is that moment where you just kind of go, not that dissimilar to almost a near-death experience when suddenly all bets are off. What such and such said in the playground doesn't matter. It genuinely doesn't matter. What such and such happens, whether I pay my tax bill or didn't pay my tax bill, doesn't matter. Everything in there suddenly doesn't matter because your value setting, because you're kind of going on the likes of a near-death experience, is kind of going, I'm gone. My slate is getting wiped clean. How? And it's just so enlightening. So that particular question was kind of a pattern break, but it was almost a moment of going, we've got wrapped up in our own stories and the story for, I'll be careful because the interview is public and so, well, I can't be, I suppose, but in terms of, you hear a lot of churn, and people sort of, well, I'll say what they want to hear. And then, if I do this and I do this, and we hold so much of so many things because either we want people to like you or we want to be seen as, a difficult character, or we want to be seen as a complex person. You don't get me, and all these things. And maybe you do, maybe you don't, but that ultimately is more primal than that, and going, I want connection, and saying, but it's kind of going, I'm going to put a test in place because before you get me, I need to know that, you're the right person. You're not going to hurt me. I need you to sort of, just check you're not actually, I'm not letting a sort of a fox into the hen run here. So I'm going to put up some barriers. I'm going to test you. And if you're okay, then I'll slowly let you in. But the problem is, after years and years and years and years of that happening, eventually the layers get so thick that people go, I can't be arsed talking to him, or, I can't be bothered listening, or whatever else. And then you get more bitter. Yeah, nobody gets me. We lean on that, and and there's more and more and more. So again, this giving people that space, where did that question come from? And you asked the question in terms of knowing when to lead. I mean, I as I say to everyone, I have an A3 pad in front of me. I sort of write down notes as I'm going along, and that's just because my brain's it's just constantly churning. So I write it down so I don't forget. That's my one fear of kind of going silence. You're going to go, Jesus, most people are. It's kind of going, how long would we need to be silent before everyone starts going, I feel really uncomfortable right now.
Yeah.
So subconsciously, that's what I'm doing. I'm putting out 50 questions, but then it's kind of going, someone will say something that triggers, and it's kind of going, actually, that matches question 26 that I've written down. It's kind of, that's a nice wee thread. Let's sort of pull that on through, because that's the story that they've talked about, and it brings them energy. And then if I link that into that, and then suddenly they're going to carry the energy into the next part, and link it into that, and suddenly you just kind of going, people going, it just felt natural. It's like, because we've kind of made sure the story flowed. I mean, you'll know this from story writing. It's kind of, you don't sort of go, well, there's chapter 12, we'll put that first, and then chapter 3, the introduction, we'll put that in the middle. And everyone's going, what's going on?
We'll chop you about a bit, yeah. And you do find that there are some great books where they really do, like Hilary Mantel does it a fair bit in some of her books, where she'll move quite swiftly between time zones, and that requires a lot of concentration when you're reading something like that. Like any story, if people are jumping about, it's difficult for us.
Well, I mean, we circle right back to, because if it's too samey and it resonates, it's too predictable, people going, oh, that's bloody boring, isn't it? And it's it doesn't actually trigger us in any way. It's a bit like meeting yourself and kind of going, we're either going to get on like a house on fire, not at all, and chances are, it's like, you bore me. Okay, well, I bore me too, so but same way, if the book is too predictable, whilst we love to see an interest in that particular character, we talked about that and saying, books have a set formula. Now there's always a sort of a set journey as such, but you need to shake up the detail, because otherwise, a lot of these sort of romantic novels and things like that, and I'm sort of half picking on them, but
are you well versed in those people? Yeah. Your favorite genre?
I'm not. I mean, people like my mother-in-law is sort of an avid reader, and and from that thing, and she sort of says, well, it's highly predictable, but I still read it, but that's because the character changes slightly and something happens, so it's very familiar, so it feels good. Again, we like to be around people we feel familiar with, but it's quirky enough and different enough for us to sort of keep us alert and keep us in an okay condition. Is it a massive shock? Do we suddenly go from that to going to, hardcore, thriller or something else? No, generally we don't, because that's almost too far outside of our sort of shock zone, or it doesn't resonate with our values. And that's why, I think books follow that sequence in terms of, questioning people. If and it's not questioning's too hard. I mean, it's, because questions, even the way you say, I'm going to question you, it's okay. Whereas you change it, going, we're going to have a chat.
We're going to have a wee chat. Yeah.
And suddenly you kind of go, okay, I can do that. I can do chats, and and I don't know. It's, I mean, I know I don't give myself enough credit for what's happening, but also it's the learning curve is that steep and that immense and intense, that actually it's just the skills are going on that. But at the same time, I'm also loving it in terms of almost sitting back and kind of going, kind of, this bus is on auto drive. We've fueled her up. We're ready to go. We're open and honest in terms of where we're what we're capable of, what's going to happen. The intention's there. We're all good in terms of we're on the road. We're that, but we're kind of going, listen. It's the stepping away from the driving seat. It's kind of going, I'm going to sit in the front row, so kind of still want to see what's going on, but
kind of
yeah. I want to sit beside the driver, but I'm now almost consciously saying I'm happy enough for fate and stuff to happen. I'm trusting in the driver to be a safe driver, to be there to do the right thing at the right time and all the rest, and I'm happy enough to sit in the passenger seat. I'm like the wee dude that translates, sits with the headset. I'm kind of taking my boss into Europe now, and he's translating and talking about stuff that's happening around him, and he's very friendly, very warm, very multilingual, and all the rest. That's kind of me at the moment. I'm kind of going, okay, we've got a great view up here. I'm not driving the bus, so that's cool. We're not responsible. It's kind of an autopilot. That's, we're safe, we're good. The rules are that we drive at 56 miles an hour. We drive very smoothly, very thing. We're going to stop for regular stops, and we go from A to B. Cool. 100%. So I can now spend my time sort of listening, getting feedback from the passengers, checking everything's going on, just being an extra pair of eyes. And it's just kind of going, oh, this is kind of nice. A lot of people like to sit in the passenger seat instead of driving. You see so much more, they say, and I love being able to look around. So we're moving forward, we're doing stuff, but I can look over the hedge. I can spot stuff and all that the driver doesn't, because the driver needs to be focused
on the road.
So
yeah. Oh, that's really good to hear. Wow, that's quite a place to have got to.
I think so. Yeah. It's sort of, it's quite refreshing in that, and I don't force it. Like even like getting people on in terms of interviews, I kind of know if I get a chance to speak to somebody that I know it'll really resonate. But I don't force it, and it's kind of going the right time, the right place. Actually, it's weird that somebody I reached out to last week, and just said, similar sort of an invite saying I host the Find the Valley podcast, blah, 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 blah. The response was civil enough in terms of saying, thanks, I'm fully booked at this time. Email such and such, and we'll put you on the waiting list. And I was like, oh, okay. And do you know what? I was like, actually, do you know what? I'm not going to do that. And I did go back there and it was just interesting going, I'm just going to say thank you at this time in terms of, I'm grateful for responding in a very civil response and all that. And it's just, I'm kind of not willing to leave open invitations out in the universe. If it's meant to be, it would have said yes. And it's not, there's no hate or discord in there at all. It's just simply going, at this time, it's obviously not right. So I'm not going to sort of leave my email on a list of your, actions on actions on actions on actions, which just is just going to add to somebody else's energy. And it's kind of, it's not, I don't want to leave my energy somewhere else that's, it's not bringing purpose. I'd rather have it that we're big enough and ugly enough to say, thank you, but it's not for me. I don't want to go swimming, and that's okay. It's not that I don't like you, but it's just not my thing. Or I don't want to be on your to-do list or on your maybe list or anything else. So I was reserving that. I'm saying, listen, I'll just put it out in the universe that if our paths cross, then I would, it'd be great to speak in future, but thank you and good luck. And
you would trust that, so it'll come back to you, the thought, do you think, in the future, if it's the right time, or what way do you think on that?
3 years ago, I would have been functional, and it would have been either send them an email or just actually leave it on my to-do list to email them and never email them.
And was that because I'm just thinking, like, you would have worked in the city. I worked in the city through the organisation I was in, very corporate culture, and everything was listed. Everything was on lists. Everything was going to be done, in time. Things were always running months and years ahead. How does that sit with you now, that type of environment? And like 3 years ago, you would have just done an autopilot.
You take that. I mean, basically there's an invitation's put out, there's an offer. It's kind of, is it accepted with condition? Kind of isn't, it isn't, it's kind of going, can't do it this time, but put yourself in this position, and, then there may be a connection in future. So I'm kind of going, well, what the hell do I do with that? I put the invitation out there. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of, it's not really being received, so it's there. This is one thing, and you kind of, then all the stuff I could then attach to that. I could say, right, well, does that make them better than me? Are they busier than me? Are they wealthier than me? Why, and you go into this curve. Okay, well, maybe it's the way I wrote the email, or maybe they know something about me. God, maybe they really know me. And this is one thing that I've left out in the universe. Now you multiply that by God knows how much in a day. And then, you do forward lists and forward lists and forward lists. So this is the next action, this is the next action, this is the next action. The problem is every action has millions of variants and variables to it. we're setting ourselves up to fail. Because if you go, right, well, that action, now don't get me wrong, you can have a plan as in terms of going, let's have a bus. Our idea is, our goal is to go from here to here. Almost the better thing is to say, right, well, okay, we're going to drive to Paris. Okay, so we know where we're going. That's the overall objective.
Yeah.
We maybe don't necessarily know who's going to drive yet. We're not sure which road we're going to go on, how it's going to happen. But overall, you're saying, listen, the bit that can take in 11 million bits of information a second, I'm going to start to put some responsibility back there in terms of, okay, we're going from here to Paris. And I'm going to start to tell people I'm going from here to Paris. And then somebody's going to say, I used to do that. I used to drive to London. And then, all this stuff is going to start to come in, and the right thing will happen at the right time. You're kind of going, oh, that's cool. And they're able to share their experience and their lessons, their learnings and all that, as opposed to me going, right, we need a bus. And we need to do this, and we need to check the tires, and then we need to check this, and we need to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And you're drowning, and it's not pleasure-based because you don't have the overall goal. I really love, and I talked about it in a chapter in a book, but the SpaceX and Elon Musk, their vision statement is super clear. Yeah. In some ways, it's a bit more than the sentence, but they're going to Mars.
Yeah,
that's the mission. That's the vision. And again, I always get confused in terms of the hierarchy: mission, vision, ethos, and a gift and purpose, and all those. Yeah, go into that another time.
Vision, I do as well. Which one's the highest? Usually the. All right. Anyway.
Well, then you get to your purpose and your core value, all that. So, but anyway, we'll skirt on very unobviously, but that's the simplicity of the message. Does he know how to get to Mars? No.
Doesn't need to.
But they're firing off rockets left, right, and center. They're spending quadrillions of pounds and money on it and all the rest. But they're all clear that they're all heading. Even a failure is kind of, it's the old Babe Ruth thing. It's like every ball they hit, it's closer to the next right one, the next positive one, the next connection, the next going through. So it all builds and builds and builds and builds. So ultimately, they're kind of going, what's my purpose? My purpose is, and you can future pace it. So you're saying, when we visit Mars, so now it's now a statement of fact. It's not a question. Would you like to go to Mars? Maybe, it's not a company vision going, maybe we'll go to Mars someday. Okay, that has all the certainty of a wet fish. It's just, okay, whatever. Maybe I'll go and get some popcorn. Maybe, it just is, there's no focus or anything on that. Whereas kind of going, the vision is Mars. Everything they're doing is ultimately now like a Christmas tree. The maybe branches off and stuff that happens in between time, but ultimately it's getting tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter till eventually the center spine that goes all the way up through is ultimately where they're going to end up. That's the point of it. Now that may change through time, may evolve, whatever. But ultimately, you kind of going, with a Christmas tree, the only bit that's everything hangs off is that center spine. The golden thread, as I like to see it, and all that. And ultimately, if you could just go shoot up straight up the middle, then it would save you so much time and hassle. And again, I come back to the pill. Why not just, you don't need to go out the pain of doing all this and trying that and doing all that. If you just focused here, but that's life too. You also got to, see it for yourself and experience it and do it and all the rest. But as soon as you can get on and do that and sort of help people to find that. If you find, what do you want to be? I come back to the acorn. The acorn. The oak tree lives in the acorn. It knows. The acorn knows what it wants to do. It's not sort of sitting there going, I'm thinking of becoming a bamboo. Okay. Yeah. Doesn't happen. It's there. It's preconceived. It's there. The intention's there. And same with so many of our ideas in terms of saying, it's, our purpose and potential is there in terms of what we can do as humans, our physical capabilities and all that, but yet we shred it in disbelief. We shred it in, excess baggage, weights, stress, everything else, and kind of going, you've kind of got a pretty efficient machine living inside you, and yet you decide to treat it badly, do this, blame it, put energy back on it. And it's kind of, it's there to serve you.
Yeah.
Your body and your mind and all that, if you just let it serve you. But instead we're like, no. I think you need a bag of crisps. You're kind of going, maybe not really.
Do
you know,
I? Yeah.
so we all know the answers, but yet we don't do it. So then when you get someone who's passionate, suddenly they're kind of going, well, I'm not going to do that because that's not serving me. That's not getting me up the Christmas tree. That's not getting me to Mars. That's not getting me to my purpose, my mission, and all the rest. And suddenly they're kind of going, well, wow, you're on a bit of a mission, aren't you? Funny you said that. Yeah, I am actually, because I'm going from A to B. And there's nothing more attractive than somebody who's on a mission, has a purpose. I mean, they radiate energy, and it could be anything.
Yeah.
But when they believe it, they're fire in their belly, they're passion. I ask people, do you have fire in their belly? Smile is ear to ear. Yes. It's
Yeah.
not kind of going, I think so. Yeah. 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 It's you just dug into that core, and the same with the bucket list. I'd love to go walk on the moon or China or whatever. You've just bypassed the consciousness and you've gone into the world of, the Dr. Zeus's and all that, the world of magical moments and worlds and all possibilities and all the rest,
Everything's possible, yeah.
And it's beautiful. There we go. I've talked a lot.
We have talked a lot, and I'm thinking kind of time-wise. I have a question that I'm hoping we can start with the next day, because it's too big, but some of the themes that were really coming through there were, well, number one, the fact that you have listened to yourself, and the power of that has helped you to really shift your life massively.
Listening and hearing are two different things. That's the one thing I'd say. We all listen, but do you hear? And it's nothing just hearing, it's also then knowing what to do with that. I don't know, I kind of have a fascination with pulling language apart and pulling tone and context apart,
and you're
even
right,
that,
it matters.
And yeah, so listening yourself, it's all part of it, and the way in which we, because you can listen aggressively, you can, you sort of, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you mean by that? I mean, let's state the bleeding obvious, but it's like same words, different tone, different context, and all the rest, and the way you process that is completely different. So, and that's kind of why, if you can listen with neutrality, as much as you can, you can't. I would argue that it's an impossible not to, to give off micro twitches or to give off that. But if you can try and hear what they're saying as much as you can, and again, it's to err is to be human, and it's kind of going, well, okay, I'll take on as much as I can, but actually taking on as much as you can. It's a bit like we, in personal development, they talk about, we're sort of about 9% of our, about 5% of, we're doing 5% of what we're capable of. So we're capable theoretically of 20% more or 20 times more. And people sort of say, listen, if you were to even get 2%, even 1% better, it would be mind altering to, I mean, literally it would just be ridiculous how different you would be. So you would go from 5% of fulfilling 5% of your potential to 6%, that, because it's 20% different as a person, that's huge changes.
Yeah.
So if you can listen, and you can never listen perfectly because you would have to live in their head and do everything, which you can't do. But if you can just listen with a bit more objective, and then also be willing to listen long enough that they go past the point of being okay to actually go into the point of finding the why or the passion or the fire in the belly or something. So you can then connect, the sort of the point they're at, you can then draw the line across to the passion, the why, the purpose. And suddenly they can kind of go, I've gone past the point of okay, which is, it could go anyway. It's anyone's guess, to the point of going, I have a reason. And it might be the final reason, but it's enough to actually drag them forward and to get positive energy, potential, opportunity, ideas, suggestions, all that, and that all feeds energy and so forth. So sorry, I know I've gone into it again, but there we go.
It's important, that's why it's an important point. And I think, we'll leave it there. I think for me, it's just, there's still a lot more of it, and the fact that even in the being listened to and listen to yourself, you find safety and trust within yourself. if that's fair to say, certainly within your much of your life, or much of what you talked about today, is a fantastic thing to be able to say. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's loads there, but I mean, trusting yourself again. It's not just a pill. It's a process too, and you know, I don't know why the expression, you know, is, what is it? You know, fake it till you make it.
yeah,
I Yeah, I blow hot and cold in that one, and probably more cold than any. Um, my thing is, you know, like anything, if you have to force it, it's not meant to be. You know, it comes back to, and this is what people have known through ages and ages and ages. You know, old wives' tales, grannies, all the sort of the wise people we know in our life. You know, and going, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. You know,
yeah,
and that sort of, there's no science, there's no formula to that whatsoever. You know, but yet, you know, what's your gut feeling? You know, and that's just accepting that actually we are capable of more than we can comprehend in 1,000 lifetimes. You know, every single one of us. And that's just the thing. You just need to know that it is crazy what you're capable of. But even, you see, even that statement, I find it quite isolating because, you know, it's, again, we've talked before about the sort of the whole statement of, if I can do it, anyone can do it. You know, and that is kind of where I come back to, and kind of going, okay, I've got to strip out my ego, because your ego reacts to that in so many ways, you know, and you know, they're trying to tell me something, they're trying to sell me something, they're trying to do whatever, you know. But if you just live with the possibility of saying, well, what if, you know, just trust in the knowledge that I'm capable of more. And everyone's saying, are you capable of more? Yes, I'm capable of more. Okay, let's go back and say, well, what if we just started doing things? I come back to the 1%. What if you started doing 14.4 minutes of stuff every day that's, like I say, forward moving? It's not just
yes,
having another chat. It's actually, it's gonna lodge in time, and it's gonna have an ongoing effect. You know, that's how you can see stuff changing, life changing, everything changing. You know, and you know, so you don't need to be right. You know, you don't have to take the whole, you know, blue pill, red pill. It's because it's going to be a series. It's an ongoing thing too, and vice versa. You know, you plant a seed in the ground, you know, whether it be a wheat seed or barley seed or whatever, you don't get, it's only at the very end do you get it. You
yeah,
know, if the plant dies just before it's harvested because it's eaten or something happens, there's zero glory. So
yeah,
it's kind of going, oh, bugger me, I went and I plowed the ground and I looked after and I sprayed it and I did this and I did this and did this and it's gone. You know, it's like 90, you know, it's like running a race and stopping 2 meters from the line. You go, oh, what the hell is that all about, you know? So yeah, I mean, that's a whole different path again, but
it is.
it's,
But I suppose it's that you stepping into, well, there's something in that moment when you step into the fact of somebody, that you're able to hear somebody saying, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And you're able to use that as a point of inspiration. It doesn't mean you have to have the same path, be on the same journey, have the same outcomes, but there's something for me certainly very freeing in seeing people who have had the courage. I suppose I would sense it as the courage.
yeah,
The reality is quite often you hit that point where you have no bloody choice. You need to take a different path. But there's a great freedom in being able to see and hear that message.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's having that faith, you know, and it is,
Yeah.
you strip out the ego in terms of someone saying, if I can do it, you can do it. And and again, it's probably just my perception, but I know mentally for so long I was rolling my eyes going, okay, whatever. What are you trying to sell me? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's just,
What's this going to cost me? Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah, you know, and
Yeah.
this is, you know, but, you know, and that's, like I say, meeting different people. And that's the thing when I'm kind of going, okay, I'm having a bit of a crisis here. You know, I'm at my point of great overwhelm. First of all, you got to accept the formula is wrong. And then if I just take it on fact basis in terms of what they're saying, if it's true, and they're saying, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Okay. So that's a method, it's a formula, it's something else. And I'm in a position where I can't stand on any soapbox and saying, yeah, my formula is better, because my formula is not good. I'm not in a good
It's not
place at that
working.
time.
Yeah.
So, you know, even just going, well, what if? You know, what if I started taking 14.4 minutes a day? It's not going to hurt. I mean, what if I do it? I do it for 3 days and I stop doing it. Well, you know, so you need to have a really low barrier to entry, something very, and because a bit like driving down the motorway for 56 miles an hour, you do that for 24 hours, and I can't do the math, but you've probably done 1,000 miles.
You've done a lot, yeah.
And that's the weird thing, and you can't. But I only did 14.4 minutes, and you're going to correct me on the math, are you?
No, but I just want to know. Sorry, I'm
Yeah, no,
listening.
let's go. No, I'm curious myself, but that's the thing is,
1,344 miles you would cover.
and people you're going too slow. You're doing 56 miles an hour, but you do it again and again and again and again. And it's not a stressful situation. You're in alignment. You feel good. Everyone's rested. Everyone's relaxed. And suddenly, people just underestimate that. Don't underestimate the power of silence. Don't underestimate, the simplicity of it. I'm as guilty as any in going, if I focused everything on one thing, which to be honest, I'm actually doing with Fire in the Belly. There's other things in my life have sort of fallen to the side. But that thing is like, I'm relentlessly doing interviews. I'm relentlessly doing this. And already I can see the cogs turning. Believe me, I'm nowhere near where I want to be, and I will be. But already I can sort of almost see it's like a time warp that actually the universe you start to actually create a vacuum behind you, because you kind of go, well, you've done this. You've done, you've traveled 1,300 miles in the bus in a day. Well, suddenly you kind of go, well, if that's happened, then suddenly this has to happen, because you've gone so far, you've achieved so much. But it's confusing because you're kind of going, you did that in a day, and it's like, I couldn't sit down and try, and it's unbelievable. But then the universe says, well, hold on, because you've done that, then actually, do you know what that meant? You've seen this opportunity, which means that's given off energy that somebody else has been encouraged, which is then, and suddenly it's kind of like Star Trek dragging the universe behind it. And suddenly it's like everyone's kind of going, I
love that image. Star Trek dragging the universe behind it. I love that.
That's probably the trailer for this entire interview. It's like, yeah, how did you get to that? It's like, yeah.
Oh, such a vision. Thank you for that.
I've probably talked ridiculously long. So listen,
I know we've been on we're going to have that. We've been on for a long time. Thank you. It's really good talking to you.
Thank you very much.